Grey's Anatomy is one of the most successful shows of all time. But drama isn't just the category it gets placed in for award shows. The show became famous for its off-the-rails storylines, cliffhangers, and characters that seem to suffer more than anyone else on television. But what's even more interesting than Grey's itself is the behind-the-scenes drama, cast feuds, and wild on-set behavior. And somehow they've managed to keep the most fascinating cast antics buried. Most people know about the big blow-ups on set, certain dramatic exits, and some of the most unbelievable things the Grey's actors have said and done over the years. But those stories barely scratch the surface of the full behind-the-scenes story of Grey's. So today, we'll be taking the deepest of dives into the cast of Grey's Anatomy and looking back on the most interesting things to happen over the last 20 years. We'll be discussing everything from cast blow-ups, bust-ups, and fights to controversial hirings and firings, and what happens when egos fueled by money and fame get out of control. And whether you're the world's biggest Grey's fan who's seen all 438 episodes, or you've seen none, there'll be something here that'll surprise you. So sit back, relax, grab a drink and a snack, and let's dive in to the behind-the-scenes story of the crazy, unhinged, $3 billion juggernaut, Grey's Anatomy. Grey's Anatomy is a medical drama that follows the lives of surgeons working at Seattle Grace Hospital in Seattle, Washington. The name comes from the very famous medical textbook Grey's Anatomy by Dr. Henry Grey, and the titular character of Grey's Anatomy the show is Meredith Grey, that's referenced in the show's title. The show's pilot sets up the first couple of seasons with Dr. Meredith Grey returning to her childhood home in Seattle, and she's come back there because she's received a coveted surgical internship offer at Seattle Grace Hospital. And Seattle Grace was where her mother used to work, who was a pioneer and star surgeon when she worked at the hospital. But her mother is now suffering from Alzheimer's and she's been placed into care. So Meredith is entering her internship, but also kind of keeping the secret of her mother's that she has pretty advanced Alzheimer's, as her mother didn't really want anyone to know. And the first couple of seasons follows Meredith and several other interns as they go through their internship year and then on to being a resident and later on down the road an attending surgeon. The other four main interns with Meredith are Christina Yang, played by Sandra Oh, Izzy Stevens, played by Katherine Heigl, Georgia O'Malley, played by T.R. Knight, and Alex Karev, played by Justin Chambers. The other primary cast in the first couple of seasons are made up of the more experienced surgeons, which were Derek Shepard, played by Patrick Dempsey, Miranda Bailey, played by Chandra Wilson, Dr. Richard Weber, played by James Pickens, and Preston Burke, played by Isaiah Washington. While the character of Meredith was the primary focus for the first 19 seasons, after the 19th season, the actress who plays Meredith, Ellen Pompeo, took a step back from the show, and although she does still appear in the show and it's still titled Grey's Anatomy, Meredith now only appears in a handful of episodes each season. The only two actors who are still on the show as regulars from the pilot are Chandra Wilson and James Pickens, who play Miranda Bailey and Richard Weber. Over the years, Grey's Anatomy became famous for its wild storylines, famous couples, crazy season finales, huge guest stars, and for the fact its main characters, especially Meredith, seem to experience about 5 jaw-dropping events every year, with plane crashes, shooting, ferry crashes, secret wives, and a guy who one of the characters flirted with for a few weeks, leaving her a check for $8.7 million after they triggered an event that kind of killed him. But if you think all of those Grey's Anatomy storylines are crazy, Wait until you hear what goes on behind the scenes of this show. Cast members joining and leaving the show is one of the most talked about things when it comes to Grey's Anatomy, as the show became quite famous for frequently killing off very popular characters in dramatic storylines, and the show has not been shy about making it known that actors who cause a lot of issues behind the scenes will end up getting a particularly gruesome and ugly death or exit from the show. The show's creator, Chandra Rhimes, has also admitted to killing off characters because the actor was particularly difficult to deal with on set. When many people think of the drama of the Grey's Anatomy set, they think of the biggest cast member exits from the show, but there's a lot more to these stars' departures than most people know. In addition to the behind-the-scenes controversies about certain cast departures, there's also been a plethora of behind-the-scenes antics over the last 2 decades that Grey's has been on screens. Because Grey's has been on TV for so long, many people break it up into different periods, with most people thinking of the heydays as the first 5 seasons of the show. Other people think the first 10 seasons were Grey and then it dropped off, and other people really put the end of the golden age as the end of the 11th season when, spoiler alert, Patrick Dempsey's character was killed off from the show. Keep in mind what I just mentioned about killing off actors who cause a lot of issues behind the scenes, because we'll talk about that much more later in the video, particularly when it comes to Patrick Dempsey. Grey's Anatomy is still watched by millions of people every single week, and new audiences are discovering it every day. I even saw Chandra Rhimes herself posting on social media that her daughter, who wasn't even born when she created Grey's Anatomy, is now watching it. So while there's viewers that are departing because they watched it since the beginning and they've seen a decline, all of those viewers are being basically made up with the new viewers that are discovering the show through streaming. I have spoken in other videos about how a lot of these older shows like Grey's Anatomy, The Office, Friends, ER, and many others are now having this second life on streaming, because while today we get amazing television with fantastic writing and huge stars and massive budgets, many of these high caliber shows that we get today, like Succession and The Boys, are only able to produce 8 episodes every 2 years. So people seek out these older shows with big episode counts so that they have content to watch. In the 90s and 2000s, shows made 20, 24 episode seasons. Actually, Grey's Anatomy during its 2nd season had a massive 27 episode long 2nd season, purely because the show was so successful. ABC just ordered more episodes to keep people watching. In 2024, Grey's was the most streamed adult show in the world. In just 2024, it was streamed just shy of 50 billion minutes on Netflix, Hulu, and Disney Plus. When Grey's Anatomy premiered, it didn't have immediate massive success. Desperate Housewives, that premiered on the same channel that same TV season, had bigger numbers, and Lost, that also premiered on the same channel the same season, had bigger and better reviews. Grey's did have decent numbers, but pretty mixed reviews. But during the pilot season, when ABC was testing all of their new shows, Grey's Anatomy outperformed Desperate Housewives and Lost, with actual real people who were watching in these testing audiences. So after the Grey's premiere, week after week, more people tuned in. More people started talking about the show, more reviews came in, the numbers began to tick up, and suddenly something with Grey's Anatomy shift. Grey's didn't have the budget of Lost or Desperate Housewives, and Chandra Rhimes and her producing partner Betsy Beers had a real battle on their hands to even get the show on air. At every turn, there was difficulties. The network couldn't understand the genius really of what Shonda Rhimes had created. The network executives were old rich men trying to get her to remove things like the very first scene of the pilot where Meredith wakes up after a one-night stand with Patrick Dempsey's character, who she would later find out was her new boss. The network executives told Shonda Rhimes, women don't go out and sleep with randomers the night before a new job. The only way they kept that scene in the show was because Betsy Beers told a room full of ABC executives that she did indeed go out and sleep with a random man before the first night of her new job. The network also had issues with the casting, and that is actually how the nickname of McDreamy about Patrick Dempsey's character came about, because Shonda Rhimes, Betsy Beers, and the other writers were trying to get across Patrick Dempsey's appeal, and they called him Fuck Me McDreamy. Obviously, for the show, they dropped the beginning and just had him be nicknamed McDreamy. There were a lot of other things they did to try and wrestle away control and decisions from Shonda Rhimes, who at this point, her biggest past project was the Britney Spears movie Crossroads. After an issue with the lighting on the pilot, which Shonda and the team tried to explain, it wasn't actually an issue. They had to light the ensemble cast this way because the ensemble cast was made up of characters of different ethnicities, which was not something super common on network TV in 2005. So the network, who said that it was an issue with the lighting and that they were going to do what they see fit, they actually intervened and fired the original director of photography, and they shut down production of Grey's, the pilot, for 2 weeks. But despite all of this, Shonda Rhimes and the writers knew what they had. They pushed on, the show premiered, and over the first season of only 9 episodes, because it was a lot shorter due to it being a mid-season replacement show, the show grew in viewership from its pilot, which is very rare. The show's premiere on March 27, 2005 drew in just over 16 million people, which is still huge numbers, but by the finale, just 2 months later, on May 22nd, 2005, the audience was over 23 million people. Hugely successful numbers then, but unheard of today. The first season ended with a massive reveal and cliffhanger, and Grey's Anatomy became even more buzzed about. From that point on, it blew past Lost in the rating, was on par with and then surpassed even Desperate Housewives, the #1 scripted show on TV that first year. It wasn't just ratings though. Grey's Anatomy was everywhere. The show won awards, the cast won awards. Overnight, the cast became huge stars. It was buzzed about by reviewers, talked about everywhere, and the cast was on magazine covers, being interviewed on red carpets. In literally 8 weeks, Grey's Anatomy went from a mid-season replacement given a 10 p.m. time slot on a Sunday night, made up of a cast that were all very unknown, and it became an absolute juggernaut of a show. #1, watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world, and the cast were all stars. A hugely successful show with a cast who went from being pretty regular people to extremely rich and famous practically overnight. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? The short answer to that is a lot. There have been many famous and infamous actor exits from Grey's Anatomy over the years, and the 3rd season saw the first of these infamous Grey's departures that set up a bit of a pattern that would go on for many more seasons, where every few years there would be this massive exit of one of the lead actors of the show, and it would be quite a publicized event. In addition to high up main cast members that left, there were also some smaller cast members and producers of the show that had what I would say are unbelievable exits from the show. And usually I do just focus on like the main cast for these type of videos, but there's one person in particular from the Grey set that I have to tell you about their exit because it legitimately is the most insane thing I have ever heard about in television or exits. And this is also tied in to one of the most famous episodes of Grey's in the last 10 years, I would say for sure. And really, the story, when I tell it to you, if you saw it in an episode of Grey's Anatomy, you would just say, oh, that's way too far-fetched. Like, I think they went too over the top with that. But this is really something that happened. So we'll get into that in just a second. Now, some people will say, why did it take to season 3 for things to really explode when it's just been widely known that there were always a lot of tensions and issues on the Grey's set, and it did come with a lot of the egos that were on there, and also it being such an ensemble show, there usually is this kind of competitive nature on these really successful shows and everybody kind of vying for the number 1 spot. The reason that Grey's didn't really have too much controversy in the first 2 seasons, I'd say it was pretty much normal standard by TV sets, where if most regular people saw it, they'd probably be horrified. But if you dropped like a very seasoned PA onto the set, they'd probably just be like, oh yeah, normal Hollywood TV set bullshit situation. But the first 2 seasons of Grey's didn't have as many issues as the rest of the seasons because of the way that the show was filmed. And so because of that, because the show was a mid-season replacement, it was shot the whole first season before anything aired, it didn't have what usually successful shows have, which is time and feedback. Shows like Desperate Housewives and Lost had almost an entire year of success and praise. Those shows shot their pilots, were picked up, started shooting the rest of the season, but by the 4th or 5th episode that they were shooting, the show was airing and 30 million people were watching the Desperate Housewives pilot. That sort of reaction changes everything on the set of a show, and it changes the actors and how they behave and a lot about their lives too, because they've just gone from being pretty regular people, especially the Grey's Anatomy cast, who most of them had not really done anything before that. And they now were going to be extremely famous, but they were able to shoot the whole first season before they even knew if the show would last past the 2nd week. When actors are pretty unknown, it's just a totally different ball game. To give you an example, on my last video, I talked all about the behind the scenes antics of Desperate Housewives. And a few hours after I posted that video, a really lovely person reached out to me who was someone who's very close to the show. Coincidentally, this person had been watching my channel for quite a while. And of course, I was able to look up and confirm who they were, and they showed me proof and everything. And we had a very interesting conversation over several hours about the set and a lot of the stuff that I'm allowed to share. I'll be working a few bits into videos and future videos because it was very interesting and some juicy stories. But the full story I will put on my Patreon and stuff, because I wouldn't do a follow-up video that close to just having released one about Desperate Housewives. But this person who was very close to the show confirmed most of the things that I did speak about in my video, things about Terry Hatcher, and they also provided a lot more information about Eva Longoria, for example, and how in the earlier seasons, especially season 1, when she joined the show, she was very unknown. She'd done a little bit of soap work, but she was totally green. This person spoke very fondly about Eva Longoria in those earlier seasons, saying how nice and normal and down to earth she was and how grateful she was to be on the show. I'm sure a lot of the Grey's Anatomy actors started out this way too. They had a bit of experience, and then getting a lead role on a scripted network show, that's a pretty big deal. But quickly, the fame and money and success goes to people's heads. I talk about this all the time in my videos because it's on such a crazy level. You're not only famous and making crazy money, but you literally have people running around after you, doing your hair, makeup, sending you free stuff, millions of fans telling you you're amazing, the media telling you you're wonderful, and all of that just feeds into people's egos. Because you have to have some sort of ego to be an actor, the same way you have to kind of want attention to be a YouTuber. But another element that gets added in with these hugely successful ensemble shows is that it becomes a competition between the actors, because everybody wants to be the most important and everybody wants to be higher up on the call sheet. There actually was a story from the Grey's Anatomy set that depicts this pretty well. When they were shooting the pilot, one of the actresses was overheard discussing how grateful she was to land this role, because actors, of course, they aren't guaranteed work, because a main role on television is one of the most secure things an actor can get, in comparison anyway. Fast forward to a few seasons down the road, and this exact same actress was overheard telling a makeup artist, "Can you believe they want me to come in on a Saturday for a measly 128 grand?" Grey's Anatomy, especially for the first 10 years, was known to be a show that had a very grueling schedule. Anyone that I've ever spoken to who had anything to do with the show, and especially the earlier seasons, were saying just how long the days were. And I mean, that is pretty standard, but these were 17, 18, 19-hour days and weekends and things like that. And it just was magnified even more because a lot of the actors that were there in the earlier seasons put even more pressure on the schedule, because they would be constantly late and they would be holding up scenes and other actors and crew. So it was a process that just heightened everything else that was going on, because people were on set for these really long shoot days. Allegedly, Patrick Dempsey was well known for being extremely difficult on the Grey's set. He was the highest paid and saw himself as the star, and was known for coming extremely late to set, which costs an obscene amount of money, because when an actor is late to set, there are hundreds of people waiting around. I have mentioned this in videos before, and one thing with people that I speak to and it's their first time on a set, they will always say, "I had no idea how many people are involved in making these shows," because even when you see like behind the scenes videos and you see the directors and like Video Village and people with the boom mic and the camera people, yes, there's a lot of people around, but there's like layers and layers of people further back from that. And I do think that's one thing that's not put across very well to the general public, that these shows like Grey's Anatomy literally have hundreds and hundreds of people involved, and even people that aren't involved in the actual shooting of that scene. There's people in wardrobe and catering and setting up props and setting up scenes for the next one that they're going to. And it is just one of those things that you kind of don't realize how many people are being held up by someone being not even, I'm talking like 10 minutes late, like hours late. Like literally everybody will just be standing around waiting for the actor to come to set.
Pretty good. It's our first day back was Wednesday, and it was, I'm going to keep saying this because I hope it embarrasses them, a 17-hour day.
And whatever amount of hours an actor is doing, you can always add at least an hour to the start and the end of the day for the crew, because they are always on set the longest. I have heard from a lot of people that when Debbie Allen joined the show, that things got a lot better schedule-wise, because Debbie Allen would put like, we are not doing more than X amount of hours. And she worked in a lot of things, like Ellen Pompeo didn't work on Fridays. Obviously, she's not on every episode now, but for the last couple of seasons that she was on full time, she wouldn't be there on a Friday. And there was certain other things that she adjusted schedules for people. And Debbie Allen would do other things that really spoke volumes, because it's not normal to do these sort of things. But she would say on Halloween, go home at 3 and let your kids go trick-or-treating and things like that. So a lot of people did say once Debbie Allen came in, things did get better. Allegedly, during the third season was when a lot of issues started to arise, and this is all coming after the second season and the schedule and Patrick Dempsey and other issues that we'll talk about throughout the rest of the video. But especially this schedule issue was what a lot of people had problems with. And one day day when Isaiah Washington and Patrick Dempsey were due to shoot a scene. Patrick Dempsey was really late and Isaiah Washington and the crew were waiting around for ages for him. And when Patrick Dempsey eventually came to set, and he would usually make them wait like hours, I'm not talking like 15 minutes. And so Isaiah Washington pretty much just was done with Patrick Dempsey messing around, and he got into an argument with him. One of the Grey's Anatomy writers, Harry Worksman, said about the argument that Washington had felt disrespected, that he and the crew had been waiting, so he went after Patrick, pushed him against the wall, and said, "You can't talk to me the way you talk to that little F-slur, TR." Another crew member, Marty Carrillo, said that everybody on set knew that TR was gay. For some reason, Isaiah just lost it and pinned Patrick against the wall. You could see Isaiah's pupils go wide, like, what did I do? It was quiet, and then everybody had to leave set. Unbelievably, Shonda Rhimes didn't actually fire Isaiah Washington after he had called TR Knight a slur. He also denied that he did so for a while. There were rumors and articles coming out like crazy about this incident. Of course, what Isaiah Washington said and issues between him and Patrick Dempsey were huge points of discussion. But the other huge talking point about this whole thing coming out was around TR Knight's sexuality. Remember, this is the mid-2000s. Things were very different with LGBT representation and also actors being out. I mean, there's still actors that are really closeted today, people that would really surprise you. And Grey's Anatomy, ironically, is where we've got some of the most significant representation in the last 20 years on mainstream TV. I'm not saying there's not issues and that it's perfect, but there's characters like Arizona and Callie and later Maya and Karina on the Grey's Anatomy spin-off Station 19. Those are some of the most significant representation ever on mainstream network TV. TR Knight was open on set and with his friends, and there were small rumors not circulating in the mainstream media or anything like that, but this incident resulted in TR being basically outed. Very shortly after this, in January 2007, the Golden Globes took place, and Grey's Anatomy, in its prime, of course, went and was nominated, and Isaiah Washington was asked about the incident, and he denied it by saying the slur again. He was asked on live TV at the Golden Globes and he said the slur. This obviously had Isaiah Washington axed from the show, and this was a huge discussion point again in the media. Washington got huge backlash from not only the Grey's Anatomy fans, but a lot of LGBT organizations, and he exited the show at the end of season 3. He was allowed to return to the show at the end of the 10th season when Sandra Oh's character exited the show. Sandra Oh was given one of the best exits on the show. Her character and Sandra Oh herself are extremely beloved by the Grey's fans, and I think her exit from the show was handled so well because Oh gave Shonda Rhimes a ton of notice that she wanted to exit. She did it in a super professional way, and she had always said at the end of the 10th season, I'm done. All I've ever heard from people who work on Grey's about Sandra Oh is that she was really great to work with and extremely professional. And I think if the vast majority of fans could pick anyone to return to the show, it would be Sandra Oh's character, Christina Yang. And although Sandra Oh is very positive about her experience on the show, she doesn't have any intention to return. The next lead actor to exit the show also had a major award show involved in her departure, but this time it was the Emmys. Ironically enough, when Isaiah Washington spoke this slur at the Golden Globes, Katherine Heigl said Washington shouldn't be allowed to speak in public, but it was Katherine Heigl speaking in public about an award show that kind of got her kicked off and leaving Grey's Anatomy. Come season 5 of the show, it was even more successful. The stars all got major pay rises, and Isaiah Washington's exit from the show actually worked out in Katherine Heigl's favor because for season 4, the cast were all getting bumps, but they were giving the biggest pay rises to Ellen Pompeo, Patrick Dempsey, Sandra Oh, and Isaiah Washington. Katherine Heigl was the actor who was the most successful in film from the Grey's Anatomy cast, so So she wasn't just on one of the most popular shows on TV. She was also starring in massive movies like Knocked Up and 27 Dresses. When Washington exited the show, Katherine Heigl was given the other top pay slot because of her being so big in the film industry and being really one of the most liked characters on the show. Heigl was only 26 at this time, and her previous biggest work was 3 seasons on the WB show Roswell, which actually is one of the main reasons I tuned into the Grey's Anatomy premiere, as I absolutely loved the show Roswell, and I mean loved it.
You know, I finally feel like I have a quasi-normal existence, and you blow it all with one random act of lunacy. Well, how did you let my misguided brother do this?
Hey, don't turn this around on me. I'm not the one who thinks he's a superhero. You use your powers all the time.
Recreationally.
During season 4, Katherine Heigl also was the first cast member to win an Emmy, and she still says to this day that was the best night of her career. Grey's Anatomy had been pretty generous to Katherine Heigl, as they'd been very flexible with her schedule so she could film the movies she was in. She'd gotten this big pay raise, they'd signed her on for another few seasons, but there was still issues between her and the show's creator, Shonda Rhimes, and some of the producers. Katherine Heigl and T.R. Knight were extremely close friends too, and he exited the show during the end of the 5th season. Things had soured with T.R. Knight over the Isaiah Washington incident, and then in the seasons after that, season 4, he felt like he didn't really have much to do and that his character was messed around a lot with storylines, and so he was pretty unhappy with his material and his place on the show. And so possibly his departure too played into a lot of the reasons that Katherine Heigl wanted to leave. So come the beginning of season 6, Katherine Heigl had been doing all these movies. She had signed on, got a big pay raise, but she was not happy with what was going on set. She was not happy with her schedule and a bunch of other things, and her closest friend from the show had also left. It really seems as though she did want to exit the show, and even she does admit she didn't handle this the best way, and she does regret it. But the year after her Emmys win, when all of this was happening, and it came time to put forward the names for consideration for that year's nominations, Katherine Heigl infamously did not put herself forward, as she said she did not think the writers had given her the material to warrant a nomination. There was a lot of back and forth in the media between Katherine Heigl and Shonda Rhimes and the producers, and Katherine Heigl was written out in a pretty awful way. Her character didn't really have an exit. There were rumors also that Katherine Heigl didn't show up for work, but she said that didn't happen. As I said, Katherine Heigl has apologized and said she would like to come back to the show, but I think it's pretty clear that's not going to happen. Surprisingly, Shonda Rhimes didn't kill off her character, which is why she didn't. Shonda Rhimes said she thought everybody expected her to do that because it was so known, the situation that was going on with Heigl at this time. So she kind of just left her out on a string and like left it up in the air. We did kind of get like a little bit of closure when Justin Chambers left the show, which is another thing we'll get into in a second, with his character kind of running off in a very strange way. By that I mean like the actor and the character was just strange, his exit from the show, which we'll get into as I said. But she had the perfect opportunity to return, I think, and they didn't have a return. They just referred to her and didn't even like use footage of her or anything like that. So I think it's pretty clear that if she wasn't going to be forgiven and returned then, I don't think it's going to happen personally. I would love to see it, but I just don't think it's going to happen. Of course, Katherine Heigl behaved very poorly, and she should have just left at the end of season 5 if she wanted to go and do movies and not take the raise, not sign on to multiple other seasons. But the Grey set did have a lot of toxicity in the earlier seasons. Not that that is any excuse. I do think Katherine Heigl is still hated over this, and in comparison to the behavior of other actors in the industry who've done really horrendous things that have hurt people, been dangerous, and just caused issues galore, there certainly are much worse things that have happened in Hollywood. I will say that in the earlier seasons of Grey's, most things that I've heard was that everyone was a nightmare, but everything that I've ever heard about Katherine Heigl, and I mean this goes back to like her Roswell days, to right up to present day, like people in the last year career have spoken to me about her, and everyone has always told me that they have really liked working with her. That yes, like she's a typical actress, but most people have said they've been really surprised how down to earth she is and how like friendly and nice. So take that for what you will. The same year that Katherine Heigl won her Emmy in 2007, it was announced that there was going to be a spin-off of Grey's Anatomy. Grey's was a massive success, so it of course made sense for ABC to want Shonda Rhimes to create another show in the Grey's universe. There of course was another spin-off after this one, Station 19, which premiered in 2018 and ran for 7 seasons, wrapping up just last year in 2024. Back in March 2007, it was announced that Addison Montgomery, played by Kate Walsh, would be the character the spin-off would center around, and the spin-off would be titled Private Practice and based in LA. Private Practice premiered in September 2007 after a 2-part backdoor pilot in season 4 of Grey's Anatomy. Kate Walsh had been on Grey's Anatomy for seasons 2 and 3 after she appeared for a final few seconds in the season 1 finale. Addison's appearance in the season 1 finale was short, but delivered the jaw-dropping reveal to Meredith Grey that Addison was the wife of Meredith Grey's season 1 long love interest, Patrick Dempsey's character Derek Shepherd. A lot of people on the Grey's Anatomy set thought that Addison Montgomery would be seen as a bit of a villain to viewers when she was introduced, but Addison Montgomery, in part thanks to Kate Walsh's performance, became a very big fan favorite. Now, all the context I gave you about the Grey's Anatomy cast egos and issues and drama on set wasn't just important for the cast exits, but also important for discussing the spin-off, because the development of the spin-off allegedly poured even more gasoline on the issues between the cast members. It was during season 3 that the cast found out about the spin-off and that it was going to center around Kate Walsh. And as I mentioned earlier, season 3 was really when things were starting to explode. When the cast found out about the spinoff, most of them were allegedly pretty angry because many of them believed that they should have been the ones to be given the spinoff. Ellen Pompeo, of course, was someone who wouldn't be considered for the spinoff, nor would want to be because she's the Grey on Grey's Anatomy, but allegedly Ellen Pompeo was not happy when she was told about the spinoff because she believed that she should have been brought into the discussions at the very beginning around the spin-off's development. And she also thought that she should have been asked for her opinion because Grey's was her show. Multiple sources have stated that the spin-off caused Ellen Pompeo to have issues with Kate Walsh. Kate Walsh also dealt with some other very unfriendly behaviors from the rest of the cast because so many of them were angry over the fact that Kate Walsh had been chosen. There are a lot of other things discussed about Kate Walsh behind the scenes, and in addition to that, she does have an interesting blind life, but when it comes to her work and reputation, behavior, and her as a person, it's always been very positive things reported and that I've heard. So it's just unfortunate that, according to a lot of sources, that Kate Walsh was iced out by a lot of the cast members for something that was just her doing her job. She didn't really do anything to them. Private Practice did run for over 100 episodes, ending its 6-season run on January 22nd, 2013. Kate Walsh did return to Grey's Anatomy for several guest appearances while she was on Private Practice, especially for crossover episodes, and then after almost a 10-year gap, she did return to Grey's Anatomy in a highly publicized recurring role for seasons 18 and 19. When fans are asked about the most heartbreaking exit from the show, a lot of people answer that it was Dr. Lexi Grey, Meredith Grey's half-sister, and when she was killed off in the shocking season 8 finale, Flight. Fans were pretty shocked by the 2012 episode, not only because of what happened, but also because of how intense the episode was, as just the previous year, there was a 2-hour season finale where a shooter had entered the hospital and took the lives of several doctors. In the season season 8 finale, Meredith Grey, Derek Shepherd, Christina Yang, Mark Sloan, and Lexi Gray take a private flight to another hospital in relation to a complicated surgery. Alex Karev was due to join them as well, but at the last minute, Arizona Robbins took his place after Karev's behavior angered her. Fans were very shocked by Lexi's exit, but they were even more blown away when the show returned the following season, and just a few episodes in, it became clear that Lexi wouldn't be the only casualty of the crash. In the third episode of season 9, Eric Dane's character Mark Sloan was also killed off due to his plane crash injuries. Chyler Leigh, who played Lexi, and Eric Dane, who played Mark Sloan, had quite different exits to the exits that we've previously discussed, and according to multiple sources, their exits were due to different reasons than what was portrayed in the mainstream media at the time. After the season 8 finale, it was announced that Chyler Leigh wanted to leave the show, and it was to spend more time with her family. I'm not really going to go too much into her departure because it is allegedly to do with mental health related issues, but she did ask to be written off the show and for it to be final. After her departure from Grey's, she was dealing with a mental health diagnosis and took a few years away from acting. She did then go on to star on Supergirl, which aired its first season on CBS and then moved to air the rest of its run on the CW. When Supergirl moved to the CW, like nearly all CW shows, it was shot in Vancouver. So when Chyler Leigh reprised her role almost 10 years later in season 17 of Grey's Anatomy, she actually couldn't come down to film at the set in LA. Season 17 was shot during 2020 and 2021, so it wasn't 100% clear if it was a scheduling conflict with Supergirl due to COVID or something else. So the scenes where Chyler Leigh appears with Ellen Pompeo's Meredith Grey, she actually filmed those scenes by herself on a green screen in Vancouver, and Ellen Pompeo filmed hers on the Grey's Anatomy set in LA. Also in 2021, after Chyler Leigh reprised her role, there were some allegations made by Chyler Leigh's husband, Nathan West, about Chyler's experience on set with a co-star. And obviously these are allegations, and her husband has now deleted the tweets where he made these allegations in the first place. Chyler's husband alleged that Jesse Williams, who also starred on Grey's Anatomy, had pursued Chyler and several other women on the show and tried to start relationships with them. His pursuit of Chyler, her husband alleges, was one of the main reasons that Jesse Williams ended up getting divorced. And Jesse did go through a very messy divorce after Chyler left the show, but Jesse Williams nor Chyler Leigh have ever commented on this, and the husband did delete the tweets shortly after posting them. As I said, Eric Dane exited the show after his 6-season contract was up, and that was around the same time Chyler Leigh did, and he also reprised his role in season 17. Many cast members reprised their roles in season 17, as originally that was written to be the last season, but that was before Ellen Pompeo signed her record-breaking deal to be the highest paid actress on television. But we'll talk about Ellen Pompeo in just a minute. When Eric Dane exited the show at the end of his original contract, the usual fluffy PR marketing lines were put out saying that they didn't think that there was any story left to tell and that his character's time on Grey's Anatomy had come to an end. But he has said a few things over the years that seem to indicate something else. There were several allegations from people close to the show that it was due to his substance use disorder. Those rumors existed for quite a few years, especially when people saw his adult tape and it appeared like he'd been taking substances. But last year, Eric Dane actually addressed all of this speculation himself. Eric Dane went on to Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert podcast, and he spoke about his exit from Grey's, and he went on to talk about his addiction issues that he was suffering from at the time that he was on the Grey's set.
How did you end up leaving? It would be so hard for me to give up security.
I didn't leave so much as I think I was let go.
At that point, you were struggling.
I was struggling. They didn't let me go because of that, although it definitely didn't help. I was starting to become, as most of these actors who have spent significant time on a show, you start to become very expensive for the network.
Yep.
And the network knows that the show is going to do what it's going to do, irrespective of who they keep on it. As long as they have their gray, they're fine. I wasn't the same guy they had hired, so I had understood when I was let go. And Shonda was really great. She protected us fiercely. She protected us publicly, she protected us privately.
We interviewed her, and I thought she was a radical
really
woman.
liked
She's
her.
radical. I love Shonda Rhimes, and she protected me, but I was probably fired.
Okay, all right.
It wasn't ceremoniously like, you're fired.
Right.
It was just like,
you're not coming back.
You're not coming back.
He did go on to clarify that although he was really struggling at the time, that he thinks that the main issue that he was let go from the show was a financial one. Eric Dane has been open about his journey to being sober over the years, and he did then go on to talk about his sobriety with Dax Shepard on the podcast. He said that he had been clean for 3 to 4 years before he joined Grey's, but he'd relapsed during the 2007 writer's strike, which obviously Grey's went on break when the writer's strike happened then, and it wasn't that far into Eric Dane's run. He'd been on the show about 3 years, and he then was talking to Dax Shepard about the rest of the time that he was on there and how things started to take a turn after the writer's strike. He said, if you take the whole 8 years I was on Grey's Anatomy, I was fucked up longer than I was sober. And that was when things really started to go sideways for me. As I said, he did reprise his role in season 17. He is still a huge fan favorite, and he will probably forever be known as McSteamy. In the early years of Grey's, as I was talking about McDreamy earlier and McSteamy, there were all these little phrases and names that really came into the culture because Grey's was so popular. There was this massive thing for the first few years of the show where it was known for saying seriously, and they even had like ads of the show pointing it out.
Seriously.
Seriously? Be serious.
Seriously? 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 Seriously?
And there was the whole McDreamy versus McSteamy thing.
McDreamy was doing the McNasty with the McHottie. That McBastard.
So Eric Dane, he did go on to Euphoria and a bunch of other shows, but I do think his character will remain one of the absolute just fan favorites, the same way Addison Montgomery and Christina Yang are. So it's time to talk about one of the biggest exits from the show, Patrick Dempsey's exit in 2015. Patrick Dempsey had been the male lead on the show for 262 episodes, and in the 21st episode of season 11, he was killed off in a car accident. When the show began, Dempsey was the highest paid actor on the show, even though Ellen Pompeo was the titular character. When the show was a success, Ellen Pompeo tried to get Dempsey to negotiate with her in the same way that the Friends cast did. But according to Ellen Pompeo, he wasn't interested in doing that. For many years, ABC execs said they would not pay Pompeo what she was asking for because they had Patrick and he's the star. As I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of issues behind the scenes with Dempsey, and many people involved with the show have alleged that Patrick Dempsey terrorized the cast and crew on set. Ellen Pompeo and Dempsey seemed to get on fine for many years. In fact, one of the promotional images used for season 5 and on the DVD box set wasn't actually like a promotional picture. It was just a candid picture of them behind the scenes. But things changed a year or so before Dempsey's exit from Grey's, as allegedly, and according to sources involved with the show, Dempsey had an affair with someone on set. This upset Pompeo very much, and there were conversations with Dempsey's wife. At this time that this was all going on, Dempsey's wife did file for divorce, but about a year later, she decided to not go through with the divorce, and they didn't end up getting divorced. For Dempsey's last 2 seasons on the show, he and Pompeo didn't speak to each other, and allegedly they had to even implement storylines to break the characters up so they wouldn't have to film so much together. His character was even banished to Washington for a large chunk of episodes that he barely appeared in. With all of this happening, Patrick Dempsey was behaving even worse on set, And Shonda Rhimes was witnessing some of this behavior and decided with a stroke of her pen that Patrick Dempsey's time on Grey's Anatomy was up. So Dempsey did leave the show in 2015, and when Pompeo was talking about him on Jada Smith's Red Table Talk in December 2018, she revealed that they still weren't speaking and hadn't spoken since the show ended. She said she didn't have any hard feelings and that he was a great actor, but she did then 2 years later reach out to Dempsey about returning to the show, and he did actually return in, again, season 17. Things do seem to be fine between them now, as Dempsey even went on to appear in an episode of Ellen Pompeo's podcast, Tell Me with Ellen Pompeo. Allegedly, during this time, there were discussions about whether Ellen Pompeo could carry the show without a strong male lead. Before Dempsey's exit, Pompeo had asked for just $5,000 more than Dempsey for the principle of her being the titular character of the show and being Meredith Grey of Grey's Anatomy, but they wouldn't give her the $5K. As I said, we'll talk about Ellen Pompeo in a minute. I'm not saying she's this perfect person. She has done and said some unhinged things, but Grey's is her show. It's a $1 billion franchise that has been on for 5,000 years. She should have been making at least $5K more than any other lead. Ellen Pompeo did get the last laugh in the end for all of the time these network executives screwed her over with money, as after everything happened with Dempsey and he left the show, Ellen did show what most people knew all along, that the show was Grey's Anatomy and about Meredith Grey. And she signed an enormous $20 million deal in 2018, making her the highest paid actress on television. And she also got a bunch of other things like producer credit on Grey's, producer credit on the other spin-off Station 19, which both of those things equal more paychecks. And there was a lot more to her deal, but we'll get into that in her chapter. But speaking of producers and Grey's Anatomy, we're going to put a very quick pause on the main cast and briefly speak about a very, very minor character, minor cast member, a cast member that in fact has no lines. But this cast member, who played a nurse in one of Grey's most famous and talked about episodes in the past 10 years, was actually only appearing in the episode because she was a co-producer and a writer on Grey's for many years. And the reason I want to discuss this person outside the main cast is because this is one of the most batshit insane stories you will hear. And especially if you're a Grey's Anatomy fan, it's going to really shock you. So before we get onto Sara Ramirez, Jessica Capshaw, Sarah Drew, Ellen Pompeo, and the two showrunners, Shonda Rhimes and Krista Vernoff, let's discuss the Grey's Anatomy co-producer who lied about many things, including having cancer. One of the most famous episodes of Grey's Anatomy in the past 10 years is the episode called Silent All These Years. It was the 19th episode of season 15, and even people who aren't huge Grey's fans probably will know the one that I'm talking about, and it's where all of the women who work in the hospital line up down the sides of a corridor when one of the patients is being pushed through who was a victim of rape. This episode was extremely powerful and not only was given rave reviews by fans, but was also picked up a lot in the media, and it got huge coverage for the show. There was also a lot of publications that spoke to the writers and people that were involved heavily with the episode. And of course, the woman who wrote the episode was given a lot of praise and was interviewed for a series of articles about this particular episode. The woman who wrote the episode is called Elizabeth Finch, and she was hired to Grey's Anatomy in 2015. She had said for years that Grey's was her dream writing job, and she ended up writing 13 episodes of the show and co-producing 172 episodes. She was, of course, involved in the writer's room, and even if she didn't write a particular episode, she did write a lot of the stuff for the character of Jo. Elizabeth Finch actually got her job with Grey's Anatomy because she wrote a piece for Elle magazine talking about how she was in her 30s and living with cancer. In particular, talking about sarcoma, the mass that she had on her spinal cord. This ended up getting her the job at Grey's, and she had previously written for True Blood, which was her first writer's assistant role in 2008. And then she moved on to The Vampire Diaries. She did also write for the show No Ordinary Family that starred Julie Benz. A year after Finch had been working at Grey's is when Krista Vernon came in, and she did a blind writer's test for all of the writer's room, and she ended up putting Elizabeth in the group that she wanted to let go from the show. There ended up being an intervention from higher-ups, and they told Vernon keep her because she was living with cancer, and they didn't want to fire her because of it. Finch would come into the Grey's Anatomy offices and look completely green. She would be in agony, and she would take breaks from writing and go and vomit in the bathroom. She talked a lot about her diagnosis, and she also did some media pieces around abortion and spoke about her experience of having to get an abortion because she was pregnant and going through cancer treatment.
6 years ago, I was diagnosed with a rare, inoperable form of bone cancer called chondrosarcoma, a cancer I still have to this day.
And she thought that she couldn't get pregnant, but when she did, she said that she had to make the choice of either having the baby and having to stop her chemo or to continue with the chemo and get the abortion. In 2018, there was the tragedy at the Tree of Life Synagogue. Elizabeth actually knew some people at this Pittsburgh location, and she ended up going and cleaning up some of her friend's remains. She told the Grey's Anatomy staff that this incident caused her to have post-traumatic stress disorder, and she ended up checking herself into a mental health facility. When she was there, she went by the name of Jo, the same character that she wrote a lot for on Grey's Anatomy. The character of Jo actually went into a mental health facility after Elizabeth had left one. Elizabeth ended up meeting a woman at the facility called Jen, who was a nurse, but had been going through a very, very difficult time and had a very abusive husband. But Elizabeth and Jen got along, and they ended up getting together and dating each other. Elizabeth also moved in with Jen and her 5 kids. This was all happening around COVID, so Elizabeth and the other writers were working on Zoom at the time, so Elizabeth was living in Kansas while still writing for the show. Elizabeth and Jen got married, and not too long after that, Elizabeth was telling Jen that she was really having a difficult time because not only was she living with cancer, but she only had one functioning kidney, and she had very bad kidney stones, and also the one functioning kidney was just not functioning well. She was in agony. And so Jen said, that's it, let's go to the hospital one day that the pain was really bad. And when they went to the hospital, Jen was watching the doctor examine Elizabeth and thinking, wow, she must be really tough and have a high pain threshold, because when the doctor was examining her and palpating around where you would usually feel for kidney issues, that Elizabeth wasn't really reacting. And when someone has a kidney stone and you're palpating, usually the person will have like a very physical reaction. And a lot of the time people will like move away or scream or something, because when you have a kidney stone, it's extremely painful. Jen thought it was a little strange, but what really put the red flags up for her was when the doctor came in back to the room and locked eyes with Jen and said, both your kidneys look absolutely fine. And Jen thought, well, one of them's not supposed to function at all, and the other one's supposed to have kidney stones and be in agony. What's going on here? Editing Ash here again, guys. Just one thing I forgot to mention about this kidney situation is that this is what Jen was told, but the Grey's Anatomy writers' room and obviously her employers had been told that she needed a kidney transplant and that she was going to actually get one because one of her friends was going to donate for her and had like tested and been matched and everything. And her friend who was going to donate the kidney to her was her good friend from True Blood, Anna Paquin. After Jen's suspicions were aroused, she had gotten married to Elizabeth very quickly. So she decided to do a bit of a deep dive and look into the things that Elizabeth had told Jen about herself. Jen started going back over Elizabeth's social media and looking at things like this Tree of Life incident that Elizabeth was supposed to have gone to and had friends whose lives were taken at it. But what Jen found is that day that this incident took place, Elizabeth was at a Halloween party. It was right there on Facebook. Over the next few days, Jen started digging deeper, and eventually she found more evidence that Elizabeth wasn't who she said she was. She ended up having to take Elizabeth to California to confront her because she wanted her to be away from Jen's 5 children that they were living with. So when they went to California, Jen confronted Elizabeth with everything, asked her about her cancer, asked her about the Tree of Life, asked her about her kidney, her knee cancer that she also claimed to have, asked her about the Emmy that she supposedly gave up because she didn't want to go to the ceremony and she wanted to stay with Jen when Jen was going through a hard time. And she asked her about a bunch of other things. And none of it was true. Elizabeth had lied about everything. She didn't have cancer. She didn't have kidney issues. She wasn't nominated for an Emmy. She didn't go to the Tree of Life synagogue. She didn't even know anyone from there. And she also had lied about her brother, who was a doctor, and claimed that her brother had abused her when they were kids. None of this was true. Elizabeth had also lied about so many other things that Jen later found out. She'd lied about being sexually harassed on the Vampire Diaries. She'd said that her brother had taken his own life because of the abuse he inflicted on Elizabeth, and there were so many other things. Jen ended up writing an email to Shonda Rhimes and telling her everything that she'd found out. She told her about the cancer, the abortion, the Tree of Life, her brother, her knee, her kidney, and there was even more stuff that they ended up finding out that Elizabeth was basically going and getting people's trauma, hearing about their stories, and taking them and pretending it happened to her. That famous episode of Grey's with the women that lined the corridor, Elizabeth is actually the nurse in that episode standing next to Joe. And the other part of the storyline in that episode is that the character of Joe meets her biological mother and finds out that she is the product of rape. Elizabeth had actually taken that story from one of the other Grey's writers who that was her story. And Elizabeth took it and didn't even ask her and just wrote it into an episode and then got all the praise in the world and picked up by all the media for telling the story of someone else. Hi guys, Editing Ash here. There is a clip that I'm just going to show you that actually has Camilla Luddington saying that she is the one who pitched the storyline for Joe.
Hey, crazy pitch. What if we change the storyline and what if Joe is a product of rape? And I remember like refreshing my email over and over and like, and I'm fired. Like she's gonna hate this pitch. Like it's done. I'll be yeah. And she wrote back like 5 minutes later, and I just remember her saying, "I love this," in all caps, and I was like, "Yes, we're doing it." And that's kind of how this ended up happening.
And I know in the series Anatomy of Lies, at the end, they put up like a black screen and say, Camille Luddington said that she came up with the storyline and she hasn't replied when we asked her for comment. And then they have Kylie Donovan throughout the episode saying, I told the story to Elizabeth Finch. This is where she got the idea from. And Anatomy of Lies seems to present it like, oh, Camille Luddington either might be lying about it or covering for the show. But I don't think that's true based on this clip. If you watch like this whole panel, and there are a lot of other interviews and promotional things that Elizabeth Finch and Camille Luddington have done. And as I mentioned earlier, Elizabeth Finch wrote a lot for the character of Jo. So I think that they came up with this thing together, and kind of both things are true. Like Elizabeth Finch and Camille Luddington came up with this idea for the character, and Elizabeth Finch took the idea from Kylie Donovan telling her story. But I just wanted to put that in there because I always want to give you the whole story of what's going on. And also, if you've either seen Anatomy of Lies or you're going to watch it, then you have kind of even more context around this story. And when it comes to Camille Luddington not addressing it, I don't think that that is anything sinister because, of course, she's not going to address it. No one from the show will be allowed to address it. They will have been told in no uncertain terms, do not answer one question about this woman because it is just a legal PR absolute nightmare. And there's nothing that they would be able to say that would make the situation better. Anything they would say would just make the situation worse, bring it all up again, and then there would be a ton of articles saying, Camille Luddington finally addresses the liar Elizabeth Finch. Shondaland has basically said she doesn't work here anymore. And that's kind of all they're ever going to say. I can't imagine they would, because even Anatomy of Lies, Kylie Donovan, all these other writers, none of them work at Grace anymore. They're all former writers. And Camille Luddington and Jessica Capshaw did briefly address it on their podcast, but you will notice it was Jessica Capshaw who spoke, who is not on the show anymore, because anything on that podcast that even touches Grey's Anatomy goes through like ABC and the production and their legal and marketing and all of that stuff. So they will have absolutely been clear to that. And I think it says a lot that it was Jessica Capshaw that said it, which I will play that clip for you so you can hear it yourself.
It never occurred to me to not believe her.
And there's so many other things that were worked into the show. The character of Jo going to the mental health facility, Debbie Allen's character, Catherine Avery, the type of cancer, it's the same cancer that Elizabeth claimed to have. And there's so many other things in the show that was worked in. They found out everything Elizabeth had told them was a lie. She'd even shaved her head and was going to the bathroom and pretending to puke. She asked for extensions because she said she was too sick. She even at one stage had one of her friends driving her to the hospital every day for chemotherapy. The extent of these lies, out of control. And the thing is, she didn't technically do anything illegal. So there was really nothing the authorities could do. And of course, a big production like Grey's Anatomy, a network like ABC, they're not really going to comment too much on it. They ended up telling the writer's room, Krista Verna told everyone, I can't tell you how I know this, but Finch doesn't have cancer. And they put out a few little comments here and there. They did a whole investigation and asked her to, show that her medical records and things. But of course, she did own up to it. And she did put out an article basically saying some people drink, some people do drugs, I lie. And she has done a lot of other articles. And I did actually see, like 3 days ago, she put out a GoFundMe to try and raise money for the LA fires. And she's done so many other things. The only things that she didn't admit were lies was that the sexual harassment from someone on the Vampire Diaries and the stuff about her brother, who is alive and is a doctor in Florida. There was a ton of other stuff that she lied about. She even lied to her parents about all of this. And her mother had had breast cancer when Elizabeth was in college. Finch's wife, Jen, of course, got divorced, and she actually told her story to Vanity Fair. They did a 2-piece article about the whole story that was called Scene Stealer, The True Lies of Elizabeth Finch. There's a part 1 and a part 2. And of course, as always, they and all of the sources that I've used to make this video, every article, interview, video, they'll all be linked down below in the description box and the pinned comment. One of the last episodes that Elizabeth Finch ever wrote for Grey's Anatomy aired on March 5th, 2020. It was directed by Debbie Allen, and it was the 16th episode of the 16th season and was called Leave the Light On. The episode is the final episode for the character Alex Karev, played by Justin Chambers. Alex Karev was an absolute fan favorite, and the way he goes out is just sad. This was due to the actor abruptly leaving the show in a shroud of mystery. But before we discuss the reasons why Justin Chambers mysteriously left the show, let's discuss some other big exits, those of Sara Ramirez, Jessica Capshaw, and Sarah Drew. Sara Ramirez joined Grey's Anatomy as Dr. Callie Torres in a recurring role in season 2. So, with the exception of the show's first short season, they were there from pretty much the beginning of Grey's. They were up to main cast in season 3 and remained with the show through season 12. Callie was originally the love interest of Dr. Georgia O'Malley, but from season 4 onwards, her main love interest was Arizona Robbins, played by Jessica Capshaw, and their little couple ship name was CALZONA. Now, as I said, I have loved Grey's since its 2005 premiere, especially the first 10 years, and at that time, there was practically no lesbian representation on TV. When I was growing up, there was little joke couples and representation like Carol and Susan on Friends. We did start to get representation like the WB show Buffy, where Willow and Tara were introduced, but that wasn't the main big networks. There was a show that came out just over a year before Grey's called The L Word that was on Showtime. So while that show was iconic and important and meant a lot to someone growing up who'd never seen themselves on TV like that, and the show then meant a lot again, as that is how I got my start on YouTube, but it wasn't a show that was on a mainstream network. It was at one point Showtime's most popular show, but it peaked at 1 million viewers. That's great, but it's nothing on Grey's Anatomy. For more about the L Word, which I absolutely love and absolutely hate, feel free to visit my original channel where I learned far too much about that show and its behind the scenes antics. Each of these videos that I do about TV shows behind the scenes, I swear they're all building to an L Word behind the scenes, because even if you don't watch that show, the stuff is so juicy that it's worth hearing. But anyway, my original channel also does have a little bit of Grey's and a bit of Station 19 with Maya and Karina, so I'll leave that link down below. So yes, we had the L Word and some other representation, but Callie and Arizona was something completely different, and having them on a huge show like Grey's was a really big deal. Well, until they got ruined anyway. I remember when Sara Ramirez was exiting the show and all of the controversy around it, because it was pretty bizarre the way it happened, and the ending to the character was horrendous. People were really angry about Callie's exit because it was written to not even be an exit. They were filming the season 12 finale at the end of April 2016, and after they finished filming the last scene, Sara posted a cryptic tweet that said, "That's a wrap for Dr. Callie Torres. Thank you all for an enriching and unforgettable roller coaster ride." That sounds like they're leaving the show, but no one, including Shonda Rhimes, the show's creator and showrunner, knew anything about this. Nothing had been announced, and there then was a slew of articles and fan speculations about whether Sara was really leaving the show, as people did know that their contract was set to expire at the end of season 12, as they'd only previously upped it for 2 years at the end of season 10, and obviously all of that came out in the press. Most people expected Sara's contract to be renewed, and 2 years ago, whenever the contract came up that time, Sara had posted a very similar cryptic tweet insinuating they were leaving the show. As I talk about in a lot of my videos, celebrities wield social media like a weapon. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're not like us that they know these tweets and anything they post is going out to a huge audience, especially someone who's on Grey's Anatomy for 10 years. They know that people are invested and watching. So when something like this is tweeted, maybe Sara wanted to tweet right as they finished that last scene, the second that they did. Or maybe when they did that last time, it helped them at the negotiating table and upping the money for their contract. Because as you continue on these shows as a series regular, just like Eric Dane said, you make more and more money. And when you're talking about one of the most successful shows of all time, a literal billion-dollar show, you're talking about a lot of money. It's why the studios in the beginning will have these long contracts for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And then when they're re-upping contracts, they're always 1, 2 years. Because in the beginning, when someone's signing on for a new show, the studio wants to get them as cheap as possible. So they'll lock them into a cheap deal for 5, 6, 7 years and hope that the show's going to be a hit and they can make even more money while paying the actors a little bit less. People who've been in the business know that's what's going on and they can negotiate for them, or if they have a good manager. But a lot of younger actors might not know what they're doing. When it comes to contract negotiations, obviously the most famous example is the Friends cast. They knew what they were worth, and what they did was absolute genius. They banded together and demanded that they were all seen as equals and were paid the exact same. That's pretty much unheard of. Most people in Hollywood, especially actors that are on huge shows like Friends and Grey's, it's all a thing of, I want to be number one on the call sheet. I want to be higher than this person. I want to make more than this person. So they're always looking for bits of leverage. The Friends cast banding all together, that was power too, because it's the 6 of them. If one of them goes or one of them doesn't get what the others do, then they all go. So doing this sort of thing, tweeting to get possibly a fan reaction, can work. Maybe it worked for Sara last time. Going directly to the network and asking for more money, what Ellen Pompeo did, that can work too. And we'll discuss more about Ellen Pompeo in a minute. Also, banding together like the Friends cast obviously works. But sometimes these things can backfire in their face. To use the L Word as an example, they did actually all band together at one point, and it worked out for some of them, but not all of them. This story about what actually happened with the L Word cast happened in 2005, but it didn't come out in 2023 when one of my friends, Jess Rothschild, who has the Hot Takes and Deep Dives podcast, her and I found out about it and then spoke about it on one of my lives. When the L Word started on Showtime, Jennifer Beals was the biggest star. People told her not to do the show actually at the time and said if she played a lesbian, she'd never work again. So because she was taking on this big risk and was the lead of the show, she got a very big salary. They went with a mostly unknown cast for the rest of the cast, and although there were some people that were unknown but had connections, like Kate Manning, who was Gwyneth Paltrow's cousin, and also the cousin of Rebecca Newman, who's Adam Newman's wife from WeWork. I have a couple of videos about WeWork if you're interested in that too. And Kate and the rest of the cast, they were pretty unknown. So when it came time to re-up their contracts, Jennifer Beals suggested to them, even though she had a different deal, she said to the younger cast, who were all pretty equal, that they, for season 3, should all band together and demand that they get a raise and it's equal for everyone. But when they went to the network saw this as aggressive, and they knew that they couldn't lose all of them, so they gave them the raises. But the network didn't want them to think that they were the ones in charge. So while they did get the money, there was a stipulation that one of them had to be fired to make up for the losses. So they killed off one of the leads in an out of nowhere storyline where over the course of a few episodes, they're diagnosed with breast cancer and pass away very quickly. It's still one of the most controversial storylines and the one that the showrunner regrets. So these things can backfire. It's unclear whether that's what happened with Sara Ramirez or whether they were just done with the show. They could have possibly wanted more money, as I said, and they just didn't get that offer. When Sara has spoken about the show in recent years, they did talk about it being their decision and wanting out. But Grey's Anatomy's NDAs are pretty ironclad, and if it was about them not getting the increase that they wanted, they're obviously not going to say that. If they did want to leave, maybe it was the case of asking for a higher figure and thinking, well, if I get this big amount, it'll be worth staying on because it will be really worth it. But if they don't give it to me, I'm done anyway. It's no skin off my nose, especially as it seemed they weren't a fan of what was going on with their character. And I can't say I blame them for that because I wasn't either. If I had to place a bet, that's probably what I think it was. Let me put this crazy number on the table. If they take it, I'll push through for 2 years. But if not, it's cool. I'm out. I'm kind of done anyway. Because Grey's Anatomy, they were on it for 10 years. 10 years of wild money. Because Grey's is a 22 to 24 episodes a year show. But also with Grey's Anatomy, they will be making even more money than the per episode money for syndication rights, streaming, and international rights. Shows nowadays, I mean, most of them don't have these huge episode counts. Even shows that are successful, they don't go to 100 episodes, which is what you usually have to get to for syndication. That's why it's such a big deal, because that is the mark of, okay, we can sell it to syndication. And streaming, there isn't really residuals. I mean, that was what the whole strike was about. And it just isn't the same anymore. Shows like Friends and ER and even up to The Office, those shows, if you get one good show like that, Leah Remini has spoken about this for The King of Queens. You get one good show that you're on for a good amount of years, that sets you up for life. But Grey's Anatomy, it's a different beast. I cannot imagine the money that they get. Even writers, I know someone who was a writer on Grey's Anatomy, and they were telling me that you might get 40 or 50K for your script, but you're looking at like 200 to 250K from the episode syndication and streaming and all of those things. So for a month, no one knew, is Callie leaving the show or not? And the episodes, as they get closer to the end of the season, there's really not a huge gap between what they're filming and what's airing. So a lot of people were thinking, how's this going to wrap up? There doesn't seem to be a lot of time. And a lot of people were hoping that Callie and Arizona would get back together. But instead, the Grey's Anatomy season 12 finale aired, and Sara tweeted out, "I'm deeply grateful for spending the last 10 years with my family at Grey's Anatomy and ABC. But for now, I'm taking some welcome time off. Shonda has been incredible to work for, and we will definitely continue our conversations. I send my love to Ellen, the rest of the cast and crew, and I look forward to always being a part of the Shondaland family." When Sara has spoken about their time on Grey's over the last 10 years since they left, they talk about it not being the happiest of times. There was a chance for the character of Callie to get a proper wrap-up 2 years later at the end of season 14 when Jessica Capshaw's character Arizona was going to leave the show. Sara Ramirez at the time was working for CBS. Shonda Rhimes said that they reached out to Sara for Jessica Capshaw's last episode and asked them to come back, but CBS wouldn't let Sara out of their contract and said that it didn't work schedule-wise. But Sara said they didn't ask them to come back. Jessica Capshaw was leaving the show because she was fired and given pretty much 3 days notice, and she wasn't the only one. Sarah Drew, who played April Kepner, was also fired from the show. On March 8th, 2018, International Women's Day, Jessica Capshaw and Sarah Drew were let go very abruptly. At the start of that season, Krista Verna had taken over as showrunner from Shonda Rhimes, and her ideas for the show didn't include Sarah Drew and Jessica Capshaw. Krista Vernon said, "As writers, our job is to follow the stories where they want to go, and sometimes that means saying goodbye to characters we love. It's been a joy and a privilege to work with these phenomenally talented actresses." Krista Vernon had decided not to offer Capshaw and Drew new contracts as both of their contracts were up at the end of that season. Jessica had been on the show for 10 seasons and Sarah had been on for 9 seasons. Both Sarah and Jessica were pretty blindsided by this. As I said, they only had a few days notice, and they both released statements on their Instagram on March 8th, 2018. Jessica wrote, "For the past 10 years, I've had the rare privilege of not only playing Arizona Robbins, but also being madly in love with playing her. She was one of the first members of the LGBTQ community to be represented in a series regular role on network television. Her impact on the world is permanent and forever. I am grateful that I have gotten to bring her to life and for the life that she has brought to me. I'm so sad to see her go, but I'm consoled by the idea that she will continue to live on and on in all of our consciousness and our imaginations. Shonda, thank you for the ride on this incredible roller coaster." And Sarah Drew's statement read, "I haven't really had time to process the information. I've been with it for less than 48 hours, so I'm not ready to say my thank yous and give all-encompassing statement about my 9 years here. I love you and I love April, and her story isn't over yet." There was quite the uproar, so in addition to saying that their stories were over, which that's never the case. If that was true, then Grey's Anatomy would have ended like 15 years ago. Everybody's story's been done like 5 times. But Krista Vernon also said that there was too many regulars, and that was the reason they weren't renewing Jessica and Sarah's contracts. To say the actresses and fans were surprised and angry would be an understatement. The actresses both seemed genuinely devastated, and they've both gone on to speak at fan conventions about how upset they were when they got the news. Jessica spoke about her saddest day being when she filmed her final scene for the show.
Which scene was the most difficult and most emotional to film? I'll make everyone sad. No, not the plane crash. No, genuinely sad. My last scene. Like, that I filmed, like just knowing that I was going and, it's 10 years and that, and we were all together, so it was very warm and loving, but sad when something's...
Both Jessica and Sarah were very classy in their statements, but as I always say, social media is wielded like a weapon. They were very particular about who they thanked, and you'll notice there was no mention of Krista Vernon in either of their statements, the current showrunner of Grey's Anatomy. I think Jessica Capshaw is probably someone who is extremely well-versed in saying things without saying things and how to behave in Hollywood and take the high road, given that she is the stepdaughter of Steven Spielberg. Fans were even more outraged when the season 14 finale actually aired because Arizona and April were both given garbage finales and conclusions. My bias is definitely going to come out here. Well, it's already out because Arizona was my favorite character. I'm a lesbian cliche, but I did really like Kepner too. And it was a knife twist when characters of 9 and 10 years were given pretty much no conclusion. After Sarah and Jessica were fired for having too many characters and their stories being over, Krista Vernon then brought back another regular, Kim Raver, who plays Teddy Altman, whose story was definitely over, and they were brought back as a regular even though they had left Grey's to pursue other opportunities. Vernon then brought on a number of new male lead characters, meaning that there actually ended up being more lead characters, so people were really confused by her comments, especially when she brought in another of her friends, this time someone completely new, a completely new character, Chris Carmack, who ended up playing Link. There's been a lot of speculation about the fact that it was Jessica Capshaw and Sarah Drew's character that were chosen to be axed because they had a lot of other people whose contracts were up for renewal too. Jessica and Sarah were the two female characters who were created when Krista Vernon was not on the show. So the speculation was that Vernon had no attachment to these characters and she wasn't familiar with their lore. Krista Vernon was a writer on Grey's from 2007 to 2011, but she then left the show, and in 2012 she joined Showtime and was a writer and a co-executive producer on the series Shameless. Shonda Rhimes then enlisted Krista Vernon to return to Grey's at the beginning of season 14 with complete creative control. Both Arizona Robbins and April Kepner joined the show when Krista Vernon wasn't on Grey's Anatomy. They joined when she was writing for Shameless. Shonda Rhimes sought Vernon out because Shonda had just signed a very big deal with Netflix and was leaving ABC. And the current showrunner of Grey's, Stacey McKee, was moving to be the showrunner of the new Grey's Anatomy spinoff, Station 19. Krista Vernon did actually go on 2 years later in 2019 to be the showrunner of both Grey's and Station 19 when McKee left. And from 2019 until 2023, Vernon was the showrunner of both. We'll talk a little bit more about Krista Vernon throughout the rest of the chapters when we're talking about Shonda and Ellen and Pay and everything like that, because she's a very not even polarizing. She's a very talked about figure in the Grey's Anatomy universe, and a lot of fans have a lot of questions and concerns about the direction the show was in under her leadership, because after this season 14 debacle, the next season, still in 2018, there was another knife twist when one of the final remaining characters from the pilot of Grey's was written out in what could only be described as a glorified PowerPoint presentation. This chapter is a bit of a deep dive, as Justin Chambers leaving the show is still kind of a mystery, and it was such a bizarre exit. Alex Karev, played by Justin Chambers, was one of the original 5 characters and interns, which fans often referred to as the Magic Era: Meredith, Alex, George, Izzy, and Christina. Over the 16 years that Justin Chambers was on the show, he and his character became absolute fan favorites. People really loved Alex's relationship with both Meredith and Arizona Robbins. Meredith and Alex became each other's person, which is a phrase that Grey's kind of uses to be meaning someone's best friend, but more than that. And if you told fans in season 1 how Karev would end up being on the show and how much viewers would love him, they wouldn't believe you. Karev being Arizona's prodigy and becoming an amazing pediatric surgeon just made him even more loved than him just being Meredith's person. And that's why it was another exit from the show that just really stung fans, especially because how poorly Karev's final exit was done. The timeline is a bit strange on this one, so just to break it down, Justin Chambers has his final appearance on Grey's at the end of November 2019 in the 8th episode of the 16th season. My Shot is the episode's name. He has his last physical appearance and he is defending Meredith in court when she's trying to retain her medical license. Then the show goes on break for its usual winter hiatus, and this usually happens from Thanksgiving to the second or third week in January, so there's no episodes during that time. Just before the show comes back at the end of January, on January 10th, 2020, Justin Chambers puts out an announcement that he is leaving Grey's Anatomy. And then all these articles start to come out saying his last episode has already happened. So fans were kind of confused and angry and saying, well, what's going to happen? Because his character just was absent in the last episode they saw. The show starts up at the end of January, and for the next 2 months, nothing is really said about Alex. He's just visiting his mom in Ohio. Even his new wife, Jo, doesn't really know what's going on. Then on March 14th, 2020, the episode Leave the Light On aired, and fans were dying to know what was going to happen and how this character was going to be wrapped up. The episode did not actually feature the character at all. Instead, there was a voiceover by Justin Chambers where his character read 3 letters that were sent to his wife Jo, his best friend Meredith, and Miranda Bailey, who was both his boss, the chief of surgery, and the resident he was assigned to when he was an intern all the way back in season 1. Through the letters, both the fans and the characters on the show, including Alex's wife, were told he wasn't going to come back to Seattle. He was now going to live on a farm with Izzy Stevens, Katherine Heigl's character, who hadn't been on the show in 10 years, and that Izzy had had twins that were born from an embryo that Izzy and Alex froze back in season 5 of the show when Izzy was going through treatment for her cancer. The only footage shown during this last episode were overlit stock footage and what kind of looked like a PowerPoint of their children and just random locations. In the opening of Alex's final episode, he talks about how he only got this amazing job and the opportunity to be a surgeon at the hospital because of a huge lie that he told. When he applied to Seattle Grace Hospital for his internship, he wrote in his application that his grades weren't the best in medical school because while he was in school, he had gone through treatment for testicular cancer and had lost a testicle. It's said that writers often draw inspiration from their own lives, so it's no surprise to hear that this episode of Grey's Anatomy was one of the last episodes of Grey's that Elizabeth Finch ever wrote before she herself was found out for faking cancer. I am kind of in two minds about this departure as a longtime Grey's fan because I do think that the character had come so far and he would just not really do something like this. He just upped and left, and I just think it was a terrible final episode and final string of episodes for someone that had been on the show for 16 years. I do think that there is precedence for him doing anything for Izzy, and I did like how they did actually freeze the embryos in season 5. It wasn't like they just pulled it out of nowhere or said it happened off screen, and I did think it was a nice touch to also have Richard Webber kind of draw on his own experience of when he had an affair with Meredith's mother and she had a daughter that Richard didn't know about, and saying how if he knew about the daughter, he would have wanted to raise her and it would have changed his decision. So he understands that when Alex found out that Izzy did have his kids and he saw his kids, that he decided to leave Seattle and Joe and go and stay with Izzy and the kids, because Alex talks about how he wanted to raise his kids not like how he was raised, without a father. And I do think that that also speaks to what we know about Alex, because he grew up with a mother with mental health issues, that he had to step in for his siblings a lot, something that I definitely relate to. Actually, one of my favorite moments on Grey's is a scene that Bailey acknowledges how impressive it was that Karev did become a doctor.
A junkie dad, crackpot mom, and somehow Karev still became a doctor. I'm not easily impressed, but I'm impressed.
Chandra Wilson is a great actress too, so this is just one of many moments where she really shines in the series, and you'll notice she's not talked about in this video because she is an unproblematic queen. So why did they have to make this decision? Why did Justin Chambers only do a voiceover after being absent for so many episodes? And why did they announce his departure 2 months after his last in-person appearance, even though there was no episodes airing, and 2 months before this voiceover episode? The short answer is no one knows absolutely. There is, of course, the usual PR answer that people give who were forced off the show or stormed off the show, which is, I wanted to leave for other opportunities, but we know that's not true. Justin Chambers did talk about how Grey's had become a bit of an actor factory job a little bit before he left. He felt like he was punching in and punching out. And I guess that depends what you want as an actor. Some actors would hate to play the same character for 16 years, but as I mentioned earlier, a lead on a show is pretty much the most secure thing you can have as an actor. And to be a lead on one of the biggest shows of all time, being paid obscene money, which after 16 years, his salary must have been astronomical, and the residuals, which are a lot, especially on a show like Grey's. And as I said before, the residuals for something like this, the streaming and DVD and rights, that money is coming in not just now, but it's coming in for decades. You also have summers off and Christmases off, and it's a really attractive package to an actor like Justin Chambers, who has a big family. He has 5 kids, and you want to go to your work, do your work, and leave. He's not someone that really is getting followed by paparazzi, maybe in the beginning a little bit, but not so much now. After 16 years, he could totally have been fed up. And when you've made that crazy money for so long and you're kind of guaranteed money through the obscene residual checks forever, you can just walk away and be done. That makes sense to some degree, but what doesn't make sense is an abrupt departure. So abrupt that it happens when you have almost 2 years left on your contract, as Chambers was contracted through the end of season 17. You also leave so abruptly that your departure is announced after you leave in your final episode. So while it definitely is possible he was done, it doesn't seem like that was the case because of the way it all happened. He also has only done 2 projects to date in the last 5-6 years since he left Grey's. Chambers has been open about having substance use issues and sleep issues that he has previously gone to get help for. There actually is a paparazzi video where Katherine Heigl finds out about Justin Chambers going into treatment. This happened in early 2008, and the video does seem to be scrubbed from the internet. It happened when Katherine Heigl and her mom were out shopping, and the paparazzi are like following them, and one of them asks for comment from Katherine about Justin going into treatment, and she says that's not true. And they said, oh, yeah, it is. And you see her go in to like a glass front store and make a phone call and then start crying on the phone. When Chambers left the show, there were a lot of sources who spoke about him wanting to work on his mental health and also about him going into treatment as soon as he left the show. There are quite a few other things that just are strange that happened around the time he left the show. There hasn't been any other comment from Grey's or ABC about when he left the show, but I don't find that surprising because Grey's certainly learned after the first couple of years that it's better just to say nothing. But there are a lot of other things that happened when Chambers was leaving the show that definitely raised some flags. Some of this stuff has come out from people who work behind the scenes because, as I've mentioned in videos a lot, naturally, there's so many people working on the show and leave the show that these things always do come out in some way. And I will get into some other interesting little bits of info in the next chapter that haven't gone mainstream. But quite a few people from behind the scenes of Grey's have alleged that there were issues that arose when Krista Vernon took over the show as the showrunner. There were issues that escalated allegedly through season 14 and 15. There's also been quite a few rumors about Justin Chambers and Camilla Luddington, who played his wife Jo Wilson on Grey's. There was speculation that something went on between them. They were spotted out quite a few times at bars by paparazzis holding hands, and there was someone who sent a tip to Dumois that said they had some sort of affair, but I have heard from a lot of people that that wasn't true. A few people I know that did work on the Grey set that told me that wasn't true did say that there was something that went down with them, but it definitely wasn't an affair, and that very, very few people know all of the details, which is extremely frustrating. And believe me, I have dug and asked and pestered, and there's something. I'm going to show you a few other things that just indicate something. And I hate putting things like this in the video where there is no this is what I think happened, but there's definitely something amiss here. Aside from everything that we mentioned, leaving mid-season, mid-contract, no proper exit, blah, 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 when Justin Chambers left the show, he thanked Shonda Rhimes, Ellen Pompeo, Chandra Wilson, and James Pickens. He didn't thank the current showrunner, Krista Vernon, and again, as I always mention, these little social media things, this is sometimes the only way that they can say anything. When it came to everyone else's statement from the show, the other cast and writers, producers, everyone, well, not that many people said anything in the first place, and the only people who said anything mentioned the character of Alex Karev, not Justin Chambers departing the show. They didn't even say his name or mention him. Even Ellen Pompeo, who is very close friends with Justin Chambers, they even were friends before Grey's Anatomy. She just retweeted things saying things like, truer words have never been spoken, when Vanity Fair would say things like, oh, you know, a big piece of Grey's Anatomy is leaving. It never mentioned his name. Even more interestingly, ABC and Krista Vernon declined to comment or make a statement, and any time over the last 5 years that Krista Vernon has been asked about his departure, she has declined to comment at all. She was even asked at a fan event fairly recently and said she wouldn't be commenting on Justin Chambers or his departure from Grey's. Justin Chambers never posts on social media. He barely has any pictures on his Instagram, and yet on January 31st, 2023, he posted a little coffee cup with a Grey's Anatomy sleeve on it, and this was posted exactly 1 week after Krista Vernon said she was stepping down as the showrunner of Grey's Anatomy. When it comes to Camilla Luddington, who played his wife in the show, she is an actor who you kind of love to see on a big show like this. She seems genuinely to love Grey's and her character. She posts tons of pictures and clips. She's also best friends with Jessica Capshaw, and they have a podcast together even now where they talk about lots of things, but they do talk about Grace stuff now and again. And I will share a really funny story in the next chapter about them. Camilla was also a very vocal supporter of her character Jo and Alex's relationship. She was always posting behind the scenes pictures with Justin Chambers. She posted quite a lot of like group shots and them filming shots, but really the only people she posted pictures, just the two of them with, were Justin Chambers and Jessica Capshaw, her best friend. But then just before Justin Chambers left the show, she stopped following him on social media and stopped following Ellen Pompeo, Justin Chambers' very close friend, and Camilla Luddington follows everyone from the show. And I know some people will say things like, oh, that's just who they're following, like who cares? But celebrities, it's different than us normal people. They know people have hawk eyes on this and are looking at everything. And as I've mentioned in videos before, it is done intentionally. These people know what they're doing, and this is sometimes the only little bit of control they have. If there was some sort of NDA done, or if they're told certain things about social media, like, oh, you can post this, you can't post that, nobody's going to put in a contract, you have to follow this person on social media. So sometimes really that is all they can do to kind of show in any way that they're not on board with someone or someone did something to slight them. And sometimes these things that can slight them or these unfollows can be done for the most ridiculous and asinine reasons. Ellen Pompeo actually stopped following Camilla Luddington first, and obviously Ellen Pompeo isn't really on the show much now. She's only on the show a handful of times a season. But from when Justin Chambers left, or just before, Ellen Pompeo and Camilla Luddington were never in scenes together, ever. Maybe there was like one small one that I've missed, but it's very odd as they used to have a lot of them. And I know, just like the unfollow thing, people will say, oh, well, look, they took a picture on this red carpet event together and they're smiling, but they're celebrities. They know if people are watching red carpet events or interviews or promotional pictures, they know that they have to look to get on, or they have to put smiles on for pictures, because they know if they look miserable or they snub someone, it will blow up into this huge thing. And especially where you're on a show where it's the same people all the time. Grey's is $1 billion show, and ABC executives, they'd be on them like a ton of bricks if there's rumors of feuds and things, because look what happened in the first 10 years of Grey's. Also, these people are actors, and most of the time they're putting on a performance anytime you're seeing them in the media. To give you an example of one, how fake this stuff can be, and also how ridiculous these slights can be. If you look at my last video about Desperate Housewives, I talked about this alleged feud between Terry Hatcher and the rest of the cast, and Terry Hatcher allegedly being a bully to Eva Longoria and the rest of the cast, and how, yes, no one ever said Terry Hatcher is the bully that is referenced by everyone who ever worked on Desperate Housewives. You look at interviews from the showrunners, they talk about a bully. Eva Longoria has done tons of media about a bully, but nobody ever said it was Terry Hatcher. And as I mentioned in that video too, fans will pull up pictures and pull up smiling videos of them all and say, oh, it can't be this person because they're smiling here and everything seems fine. But when I put that video out, I had someone from the show reach out to me, and they asked to be anonymous and asked for their job to be anonymous too, because they said it would be very easy to figure out who it was based on everything they told me. And they spent a lot of hours talking to me, and they confirmed everything. Terry Hatcher was the bully. Terry Hatcher was a nightmare. And they even told me what the whole origin of the issue with the cast was and the whole Vanity Fair explosion, especially with Marsha Cross and Terry Hatcher being very angry when they got to the Vanity Fair shoot. And according to the person I spoke to from the show, they said that when they were shooting the pilot, because they didn't know it was going to be a huge hit and it's a very tight budget when you're shooting pilots, that they had Terry Hatcher and Marsha Cross sharing a makeup person. And so Terry Hatcher was shooting her scene first, so the makeup person did her makeup and Marsha Cross arrived to set barefaced like the usual case. And whenever it was time to do Marsha's makeup, because her scenes were up next, Terry was getting annoyed because she said she needed the makeup person to come with her to do touch-ups while the scene was being shot. And the makeup person, who is obviously just doing their job, was saying, well, I have to do Marsha's makeup because she has nothing on and her scene is next. So they got into a huge argument about this. And according to the person from the show, that is the genesis of the entire issues and the whole Vanity Fair blow up. So things like that are so small can turn into these huge things, because you're talking about actors, especially established ones that have egos and issues. And when there's money and all of this stuff involved, it just can get really out of control. And to give you an example about a small slight that had big consequences on the Grey's Anatomy set, there was an actress on the show called Jerrica Hinton. And Jerrica Hinton ended up exiting the show because allegedly Ellen Pompeo didn't like that Jerrica was taking a lot of pictures and like Polaroids on the set and posting them on social media without asking Ellen. So she didn't want her to continue on the show. And Jerrica even got another job with a Chandra project, because when you have someone that's been the star of a show for 20 years and they're a producer and they have this insane, huge $20 million deal, they have a lot of power. And sometimes you have to do these dumb things to keep them happy. And as we'll go into in just one second, sometimes people are let go from Grey's Anatomy over the dumbest things. I know the story about Justin Chambers' exit leaves things up in the air and a ton of threads, and I hate doing that. I hate when there's not even just, this seems to be what happened. Okay, jumping in with some last threads, because you guys know I'm always researching up to last second, and I do hope to post this today, and I also am always still pestering people if I have any connection to people from the show or something. So I forgot to mention one thing before I get into the thing I want to discuss, but this thing that I forgot relates to it. Camilla Luddington has said the first time she ever read that letter was when she was on camera.
It was a really hard scene to film, and here's why. I'll tell you really quick. The camera, as you can see on the show, the camera's doing a 360 around me like this, and they did not let me read the letter until I was on camera. And so you're seeing the real reaction of me reading it for the first time, and the divorce papers. Yeah, it was really fun. And so my tears, that day was a lot. It was a really hard day. It was very emotional. Screw him.
And do I think that's strange to withhold stuff from actors? In some situations, no. When The Office was wrapping up, there was a situation where one of the characters, Jim, gave a letter to his wife, Pam, that was from years and years ago, and the audience never find out what the letter says, but when the character is reading it to herself on camera, the actors came out and said that what the actress Jenna Fisher was actually reading was a letter that John Krasinski, who was playing her husband, he had written a letter like as himself, John, to Jenna saying like, oh, it's been so great working with you all these years and, you know, having this couple and all this stuff. And it was a really nice thing. But that's different. That's between the actors and like wanting this real emotion because it's a genuine letter from the other actor. She's not even acting with anyone. It just was odd decision. But the thing I want to discuss is when I went to pull that clip, I noticed it was Jessica Capshaw's face that seemed to give something away. So I'm not one of those people that like is into body language or anything. Actually, the very first day of like undergrad, not even grad school, they kind of tell you a lot of that is pseudoscience. It's not really based in like reality or science a lot of the time. So I'm not saying that, this has anything to do with that. It's more just the reaction and like glances and things between them. Because as a lesbian, I have a PhD in eye contact and glances between women. But when Camilla Luddington is telling the story about it being the first time she saw this letter, Jessica Capshaw like interjects and she has this like little reaction go across her face that to me is, why the fuck would they do that?
Real reaction of me reading it for the first time and the divorce papers. Yeah, it was really fun. And so my tears, that day was a lot. It was a really hard day.
It continues a little bit. And then right whenever Camilla Luddington is saying, screw him, you see this little like look between the two of them. And I know that look. That is the look that you give your friend whenever you are somewhere around other people and you are saying something that is meaning more than what you can say in front of other people.
Screw him.
So maybe she is just talking about Alex, but she could also be talking about Justin Chambers when she's saying screw him. There just is something more here. I mean, if you go back and look at their interviews or how they were, and even just like social media, which obviously can be deceiving a lot of the time, just everything about the way that the relationship between Camilla and Justin and the way she spoke about the character and stuff. And then looking at it now, it just seems so different. And it's the same with Ellen Pompeo. As I said, Camilla stopped following both of them just before Justin left the show. She has no scenes with Ellen Pompeo like anymore. Like they don't interact anything. And prior to Justin leaving the show, she didn't post Ellen so much like on her Instagram grid, but there was tons of stories and everything, and it was always Jessica Capshaw, Ellen Pompeo, and Camilla Luddington. And like even people on like fan forums and stuff used to call them like the trio and stuff. They used to get interviewed together all the time.
Maybe Chambers.
Yeah, I was gonna go ahead.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. We love
in the best way.
So there's just such a shift, and I just think there was way more being said in that little interview there. I know some people will disagree with me and I probably sound a little bit unhinged, but I would love to know everyone's take. So back to past me. Those things that I mentioned, those little flags, especially when added all together, there's just something more there. It's very suspicious. And who knows if we'll ever find out what happened. I really hope we do. I hope someone does some sort of tell-all, but Justin Chambers hasn't really said anything. Although he hasn't said anything, there are other exits from the show where the actors have been much more forthright about how slighted they were by ABC and Grey's Anatomy producers. Before Callie in Arizona, there was Callie and Erica Hahn. Erica Hahn was a character who popped up every now and again on Grey's for the first couple of seasons and then became a recurring character and became Callie's love interest. When Callie and Hahn got together, neither of them had been with a woman before. And after they spent the night together, Hahn had this really famous speech where she talked about how she kind of didn't know what she was missing. And it's this very famous speech about leaves.
When I was a kid, they said that I needed glasses. I didn't understand that. It didn't make sense to me because I could see fine. And then I get the glasses and I'm in the car on the way home. The big green blobs that I had been staring at my whole life, they weren't big green blobs. They were leaves. You are glasses.
And even though the speech is a little bit cheesy, especially as someone who was coming out around this time as like a late teen, 2021, this is absolutely how I felt. I used to tell like my friends and stuff that, yeah, anytime that I'd ever had to pretend to like a guy and I'd listen to my friends talk about it, I used to just like be so confused that they could care so much. And I just was like, oh yeah, I guess that I like, you know, Matt LeBlanc or someone else I pulled out of thin air. David Boreanaz was normally what I went with. But when I moved to Tampa and started dating my first girlfriend when I was 16 and a junior in high school at an all-girls school, Academy of the Holy Names, which had a very high proportion of lesbians that, you know, Kayleigh McEnany also went there, and I was the first ever lesbian that she knew. So that's also a claim to fame. But that was absolutely how I felt, like the leaves thing. I used to say to my friends, oh, like now that I've dated a girl, I know what people are like talking about, and I know what people are saying in love songs and how people feel in movies and stuff. And again, that's super cheesy, but it was a moment of, oh, this is like what people are talking about. This is what like love and like liking someone is. It's not pretending. It does suck what happened to the actress because she's been pretty open about what happened. Brooke Smith is her name, and she basically was walking out of set. When she tells the story, she talks about having her key to her Prius in her hand, and they just came up to her and said, oh, we are going to write you off the show. And she was kind of blindsided and said, okay, when? And they said, oh, you know, right now, this is your last episode that you just filmed. And according to Brooke Smith, this is according to the head of ABC Entertainment, Stephen McPherson, he apparently didn't like her character. And while there is like a lot of control that the showrunner and writers has, and I'm sure especially Shonda Rhimes, who had so many successful shows and was responsible for Grey's and huge at ABC, there are certain things that, and I think a lot of people forget this when they blame showrunners and stuff, which they do warrant a lot of blame a lot of the time, but a lot of the network executives, if they say something like that, like this character, get them out of here, or you are going to kill this character off, you're not going to kill this character off, or these people are going to end up together, these aren't. The network executives are the ones that kind of have the be all and say all. And so Brooke Smith has spoken about how she believes, or she was told, that it was this Stephen McPherson that said, get her out of here. But he has refuted that, and his comment was kind of nasty. He basically was saying that she just was blaming it on him for her own shortcomings with the show. There also are a lot of other characters who were just cut loose from the show with not really any sort of decorum. A lot of the transplants from Mercy West that came over with Jackson and April, they were unceremoniously killed off in the season 7 finale, where it's the shooting episode, and a lot of them were literally ruthlessly killed in that finale. And most of them found out at the table read, which you'd think someone would have pulled them aside before and said it. And over the years, there's been a lot of new interns that add on to the show. A lot of them were just kind of told at the table read, well, told when they're reading the script that this is the end of their run. And then there's a lot of budgetary cuts too. So in the beginning of the show, there was a lot of scenes at Joe's bar, which was across the street, well, in the show, across the street from the hospital. And they used to have all these scenes that, you know, the interns would go over, and they would have like the real conversations and like talking about the romantic relationships and things like that. And the actor who played Joe, Stephen Bailey, he started asking for more money as the show was getting more popular, and he started noticing they were using him less and less, and sometimes they'd have scenes in the bar but they wouldn't show him. And then they started switching those scenes to the elevator, and he was saying that they realized, oh, we don't need to have this set of the bar, we don't need to pay all these background actors, we don't need to pay Joe to be behind the bar, we can put this 2-minute scene of these two characters talking, or these two love interests talking, and just put it in the elevator at the hospital. they don't even need to put background actors or nothing. It's literally a blank wall in an elevator. So that's a lot of money saved. So they started doing that, and the elevator was one of the really famous things about the early seasons of the show. One of the other really big departures that hit fans and seemed to come out of nowhere and had a lot of animosity around the departure was the character of DeLuca. The character was killed in a stabbing, and he was actually killed off on the other show, Station 19. When the Greys episode was happening with him, the cast did the table read, and nobody knew at the end of the episode if he was going to live or not. They left it up in the air, and they didn't tell anyone on the show because they didn't want leaks and things. And so the actor was really one of those actors like Camilla Luddington who seemed to really love being on the show. He actually got a tattoo of his character's time of death, and people were really angry when he was taken out of the show because he hadn't been on it for like ages. He was on it for quite a few years, but he really became like a fan favorite too. I liked DeLuca because he gave us his sister Karina DeLuca, and Karina was on Grey's to begin with, and then she transferred over to Station 19, and then she was in a relationship with one of the firefighters, Maya, who they ended up being in a relationship for years and years on Station 19. Their little like ship name was Marina, and it was Maya and Karina, so they were really popular as well. They were the other popular like lesbian ship apart from CALZONA. And so finally, we'll discuss Meredith Grey herself and the actress who plays her, Ellen Pompeo. Sorry you're seeing me in so many different outfits. I've been sick while I've been making this video, so my voice only lasts for so long, so that is the explanation. Ellen Pompeo is one of the most unique and interesting TV show leads of all time. When she signed on to Grey's, she was pretty unknown, so just before we dive into Ellen Pompeo, I really want to tell you one funny story that will literally take 20-30 seconds. I just couldn't fit it in anywhere else, and it's about Jessica Capshaw and Camilla Luddington, who, as I mentioned before, have a podcast. They're like best friends, and it's just a funny story, and I talk about so much drama here and not positive things because, let me tell you, people are not interested in the positive things. So this is just a silly story that I think is really funny, and they did share this on their podcast. When I say they're best friends, I do mean it legitimately, as far as I can tell anyway. It does seem like they are actual best friends, not the usual like fake Hollywood, oh yes, we're very close, we work together. They don't seem to just do the podcast together. They do a ton of fan events where they like travel a lot together, and they do lots of social media stuff together. They're together a lot. And last night when I was like editing really late, I actually saw that Jessica Capshaw had like put this little comment on Camilla Luddington's video that she'd posted with some other friends like taking shots, and she'd written, oh, you have other friends. I think stuff like that is like cute when celebrities do it, you know, because it's obviously done in the lens of, oh, we're showing fans, because obviously they can just text each other this stuff and they're aware of how many people are watching. So when Camilla Luddington first started on Grey's, she and Jessica Capshaw did not get on, and Jessica Capshaw really didn't like her in the beginning because there was one day that it was Camilla Luddington's like first time that she was ever going to be at a table read. She just started on Grey's. She was really excited. And as I said before, she posts a lot on social media. So Shonda Rhimes had gotten like one of those burger food trucks for the set. And Camilla Luddington went out and like took a picture of the truck and posted it on one of her Instagram stories and said something like, oh, thanks to Shonda Rhimes, you know, for getting us burgers or something. And I can't actually show it to you because it's been scrubbed, because Jessica Capshaw came storming into the table read and she was like, who took this? And she had like one of the fan sites up where they posted the picture, and it was the food truck, and then in the background you just saw Jessica Capshaw with like 2 burgers, and she was like eating one like massive like wide open mouth and had like the other one in her hand, and all the fans were like sharing it all over social media. And so Camilla Luddington was like, I died whenever I realized it was me, and I was like furiously deleting it because of course fans are going to be like, oh, Camilla Luddington shared this, like check it out. So I just thought that was a really dumb funny story to share. As we've established throughout this video, Grey's is a juggernaut, and right at the center of it is Meredith Grey, played by Ellen Pompeo. Putting aside the show's success, Meredith Grey is not the typical show lead. While yes, the show is about Meredith Grey, Grey's Anatomy, her story is central, but it's really the characters that orbit her world. She does step aside to let others shine through the show. Especially in earlier seasons, you were much more likely to hear people answer things like, who's your favorite character? With answers like Christina or Bailey rather than Meredith. I think there were a lot of reasons for this. One, it was a very big ensemble cast, but also in the beginning, ABC making it so clear that Patrick Dempsey was the big draw and the star probably contributed to that. There was also things like Katherine Heigl was the one who was booking movie roles and winning awards, and Sandra Oh was always the one that was praised in reviews for her performances. Over the last 20 years, Ellen Pompeo has not done any projects outside of Grey's and its spin-offs, other than one Taylor Swift music video and a few episodes of Doc McStuffins, the kids show. There's no one else in Hollywood who has that resume. Most people, when they get a successful show, start branching out into movie roles if they can, and other shows if they can't do movies. You never really hear much about Ellen when it comes to paparazzi too. The only sort of gossipy stuff that ever really gets discussed is about her husband and their relationship and infidelity. It does seem as though she has been just solely dedicated to Grey's and not really interested in going out and being seen at places, getting paparazzi shots, because as I talk about in a lot of other videos, you know, there's people know that, oh, if I go here, I'm going to get photographed, and most people aren't being followed around by paparazzi. A lot of that stuff is staged. And even in the beginning, when a lot of her castmates did have legitimate interest from paparazzi and were getting interviews and photographed for things, she didn't really seem that interested even then. And she actually did a little trick that Daniel Radcliffe borrowed from her, where he did this when he was performing on Broadway, but she did it on the Grey set, where she used to wear the exact same thing to the Grey set every single day, because after a few days, the pictures basically become worthless. And after a while, the paparazzi stop bothering, basically. One great thing I've always heard about her is that no matter what, she has always time for fans, especially younger fans, and actually has time, not the fake we're in front of cameras so I'll be nice to fans sense. I've heard she really does go out of her way to speak to fans and will never ever turn down young fans for pictures and autographs, or if they want to just speak to her, which is commendable and very nice, because I'm telling you, that is not usually the case. On the other side of that, I know there are a lot of people over the years who have become frustrated with her saying, I'm going to be done with Grey's Anatomy, I'm not going to do any more. And then she'd sign on for more seasons. And she'd also talk, not so much now, but a lot in the beginning, about how much work it was, which I know it's a lot of work. I know, especially in the beginning, they were doing crazy hours, but girl, you're the star of a TV show being paid millions of dollars. Complain to your husband or your friends or your therapist. don't tell your fans who, a lot of which are struggling to get by in a world on fire. Every couple of years, or recently every year, there's this big discussion about whether this is going to be the final season of Grey's Anatomy. And during season 17, that discussion was at its height. That season really did seem at the time like it could be the last, and many of the people associated with the show, even Shonda Rhimes and Krista Vernon, have said they did originally write that show to be the last. They started bringing back all of the fan favorites. Even Patrick Dempsey came back. Ellen Pompeo and Dempsey mended their relationship, and there was all of the big cast members that had left. They all, well, as many as would, returned, and it did seem like this could be it. But of course, the show didn't end, and for season 18, Ellen Pompeo got the biggest deal in television history and became the highest paid actress on TV. Just before Patrick Dempsey left the show at the beginning of the 2010s, there was a bit of a rating slump, and then it started to pick up again a year or two later. Around this time was when it became a lot easier to watch TV that you missed the live airing. So yes, TiVo and things was around in the 2000s, but not everyone had it by any means. And by the 2010s, people were starting to get catch-up TV and TiVo, and you could stream things, and it just became so much more accessible because previously, episodic TV that had season-long storylines and plots to follow didn't do that great in syndication. So the fact that it was just easier to go and watch an episode you missed, or if you hadn't watched a season, you could go and watch it, or even binge watching obviously became a huge thing. So people who'd never seen the show could watch it all in a summer and pick up again in September. And as I said 27 years ago when I started this video, Grey's is the most streamed show in the world. This ability for the show to be watched and bringing in new people, it just changed the game. And so from that point on, the show was so much more valuable. It had become so popular and the numbers were huge. So it was so worth it for them to then pay this huge deal to Ellen Pompeo, because they made the mistake of not giving Shonda Rhimes a big deal the previous year. Up until this point, Shonda Rhimes was getting paid $10 million a year by ABC. Netflix offered her $150 million and a ton of incentives. Netflix obviously saw what value there was in Grey's, and when they put this offer of $150 million on the table, ABC then did start to negotiate with Rhimes, because not only did she have Grey's on their network, she had other shows like How to Get Away with Murder, which ran for 5 years and starred Viola Davis, and Scandal, which starred Kerry Washington and ran for 7 years. She did have a ton of other shows like The Catch, that some of those weren't as successful, but she had a huge amount of shows on the network, and I can't imagine the money that Shondaland has brought in for ABC. But ABC's loss was Netflix's gain, and Netflix also gave Rhimes the time that she needed to build another wildly successful show. She launched Bridgerton 3 years into her Netflix deal, and that show has been astronomically successful for Netflix. They didn't pay Rhimes her worth and she walked. They didn't want to make the same mistake with Ellen Pompeo, since Grey's was really hinging on her being attached. They went on to negotiate a $20 million a year deal with Ellen Pompeo from season 18 onwards. She was earning $575,000 per episode, along with a 7-figure signing bonus and 2 full back-end equity points on the series, estimated to bring in another 6 to 7 million. She was also getting a producing fee because she had been a producer and then she was up to executive producer, which that is where the real money is in TV. And she was also getting a back end on the new Grey's Anatomy spinoff that was happening in 2018, Station 19. So on top of all of that and a ton of other incentives and little things here and there, she also got pilot commitments and office space on Disney's Burbank lot for her own production company, Calamity Jane. There was some discussion around this time that Ellen's big deal is what forced Grey's and ABC to fire Jessica Capshaw and Sarah Drew, but I think that was more likely ABC trying to push some of the massive uproar and backlash from fans onto Ellen, because there was so much backlash about that. Like, they even flew a plane over the set saying, "We love you, Jessica and Sarah," fans did, because they were so mad that they were being pushed out. There actually was a poll the year before Arizona, April, and Alex left on like the Grey's Anatomy Reddit, which is huge, and the 3 people that won for like the most loved characters and people that they were most interested in on the show, and it was Arizona, April, and Alex that won that poll, and then the next year all of them were gone. So people were mad, and I think that it just doesn't make any sense logically either, because a deal like this would have been worked out for ages. There would have been so many people involved and lawyers, and especially all the other little bits and the producing and the Station 19. They fired Jessica and Sarah really abruptly with no real exit. They did it in an absolutely shitty way, and there wasn't even a exit for them. They didn't get any wrap up. The show had the money if they wanted to, and if the budget was so tight, Krista Vernon wouldn't have been able to bring in a ton of other regulars and bring back Kim Raver and bring in Chris Carmack and bring in all these other new regulars. So I don't think that it is to do with Ellen's deal, and if it is, then we should be asking why, because I think, yes, it is insane money, $20 million a year, but that show is worth $3 billion with a B. They have plenty of money. That show has made astronomical money. And I think that if you are the star of the show and bringing in that amount, that yes, you should be getting a big chunk of the pie, because it shouldn't be all these network executives making bank. I talk about this a lot in my own business, and you can ask anyone who works in it, that I hate that you have these businesses, whether it's a TV show or a tiny little business like mine, that I don't think that it's right that you have one person at the top that makes everything. I think that all of your employees should be making 6 figures before you go out and buy a Ferrari. So I think that it's fair that if the show is making so much money, that Shonda Rhimes should have been getting way more. And they obviously made that mistake, because none of this would be here without Shonda Rhimes. And they learned that the hard way. Netflix paid her worth. So I know I've talked about this long enough, but I do feel really strongly about paying people their goddamn worth. So whether it's TV show or, small little businesses like mine. Being on the biggest TV show for 20 years, there's definitely going to be some not so great things that she's done. And I mean, I have talked about some of them throughout the video, with things like Jerrica Hinton and other cast members that there's been issues with. But 2 of the main big things that most people cannot excuse when it comes to Ellen Pompeo are her comments regarding Harvey Weinstein victims and some of her comments on race. One interview that is brought up a lot is this joint interview that was done between Shonda Rhimes, Viola Davis, Kerry Washington, and Ellen Pompeo for Entertainment Weekly. And this was done in 2015. There was a whole photo shoot around it. It was a cover story, and the whole premise around it was, Shonda Rhimes is taking over Thursday nights on ABC. They used to call it TGIT, thank God it's Thursday. And they even had like their own ads that was like Shonda's 3 shows, Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, and How to Get Away with Murder all airing on one night. And the interview was with the Entertainment Weekly reporter, and they did a photo shoot first. When they sat down afterwards to do the interview, Ellen Pompeo and Kerry Washington were still in like their makeup and like everything for the photo shoot, which if you've never seen like that sort of thing, it's really over the top makeup like in person, because you obviously want it to like show up on camera. It's kind of like how people do a little bit more makeup on like their wedding. Viola Davis had actually gone and changed into a robe, and she'd taken off like a lot of her makeup when they sat down to do the interview. And this isn't actually talked about in the interview. I know about this because I read it in the book How to Save a Life, about the behind the scenes of Grey's Anatomy, and this interview is talked about towards the end, and it's actually the Entertainment Weekly interviewer that's telling the story in this Grey's Anatomy book. And they were saying how when Viola Davis sat down, it reminded them of this really famous scene from How to Get Away with Murder. It's probably the most famous scene from the show, where Viola Davis's character Annalise Keating sits down at like her vanity in her room, and she's about to confront her husband who's been having an affair with one of his students, and she like takes off like her makeup and all her jewelry and stuff, and then she confronts him. And I remember when that episode and that scene came out, like everybody was talking about it. It's really great scene. Like I think Viola Davis is an amazing actress. Even when How to Get Away with Murder went off the rails, like I still watched it because she's so good. So when they sat down to do this interview, Shonda Rhimes and then Viola Davis were asked about this horrible piece in the New York Times by this guy called Alessandra Stanley, and he basically was commenting on How to Get Away with Murder and said that it should be called How to Get Away with Being an Angry Black Woman. And he talked about Viola Davis being less classically beautiful than some other lighter skinned Black actresses, which is just disgusting. And they actually asked Shonda and then Viola, did anything positive come out of the backlash to this piece? Because obviously people were pissed when they read this, because of course they were. So after they asked, did anything positive come? Like everybody started like groaning, of course. And, you know, we're like, ugh, about this guy. And then Shonda Rhimes started to answer and said, there were articles written in response that made me feel like, oh my God, there are some thinking people out there. Because if that had gone uncommented upon, and then Ellen Pompeo cut in and said, if any good comes out of ignorance, then I'll take the ignorance. And when Ellen said that, Viola Davis like let out a big sigh. The interviewer asked Viola, do you feel that way, Viola? And she answered, I understand what Ellen is talking about, but I've been on the other side of ignorance. And that's when Ellen Pompeo's eyes, according to the interviewer, welled up with tears and she left the room. Viola continued saying, colorism and racism in this country are so powerful that the Jim Crow laws are gone, but what's left is a mindset. As an actress, I've been a great victim of that. There were a lot of things that I am that people did not allow me to be until I got the role of Annalise Keating. Viola Davis spoke a bit more, and then Ellen Pompeo came back into the room, sat down, and the interviewer adds like a little description saying that when she sat down, Kerry Washington kind of like patted her on the back and as if to kind of be like, oh, are you okay? And Ellen Pompeo was just like to Kerry Washington, because obviously Kerry Washington's being super nice. And they carried on with the interview. The interviewer did speak about this being like disruptive, of course, to Viola answering. But the larger point being that Ellen Pompeo is interrupting and interjecting when Shonda Rhimes and Viola Davis are answering something that Ellen Pompeo cannot fathom the severity of. She has gained a lot of criticism over the years for a lot of other comments that she's made, and especially things like, I understand certain issues around race because of my biracial children, and a lot of other comments. But all of this stuff with Entertainment Weekly, the 2015 interview, this all got brought up again in 2021 because of a story that she told on her podcast. But her podcast, Tell Me with Ellen Pompeo, she had Patrick Dempsey on when they'd mended their relationship, and he had just appeared on season 17 the year before. And she told Patrick about working with Denzel Washington, who came in and directed an episode of the 12th season in February 2016. Ellen told Patrick Dempsey that she had changed a line of dialogue in the script, and it was in a scene where an epileptic patient was trying to apologize to Meredith for breaking her jaw. This episode is another like famous standalone episode where Meredith is attacked by a patient and she like loses her hearing, so a lot of it is in silence. And again, it was written by Elizabeth Finch. She used to write a lot of these standalone episodes. Ellen then went on to explain further to Patrick and said he, as in the patient, apologized to me, but he was doing it really softly. He made this choice to speak very softly, and I was pissed that I had to sit there and listen to this apology, and he wasn't looking me in the eye. Again, we love actors who make choices, and I yelled at him and said, "Look at me when you apologize, look at me," and that wasn't in the dialogue. She then said, Denzel went ham on my ass. He was like, "I'm the director, don't you tell me what to do," and I was like, "Listen, motherfucker, this is my show, this is my set, who are you telling me? You barely know where the bathroom is." She said she didn't speak to Denzel Washington for a bit after that, and then said, "Any set, unless it's a comedy, it's an emotional place, and there's passion and there's fire." She did say that they ended up making up, and she finished the story by saying, "So we were fine after that, and he's just one of the best to ever do it. You know, I have the utmost respect for him as an actor, as a director, as everything." Her other comments that have garnered a lot of criticism and backlash over the years are comments surrounding Harvey Weinstein and Me Too. In July 2018, she was speaking at an Oxford Union panel, and when she was asked about Weinstein and Me Too in general, she said, "I think we bear some responsibility. Not all, but it takes two to tango for sure." When she was clarifying her comments, she spoke about meeting Harvey Weinstein and meeting him in the day and all of this stuff, but it just, she was digging herself like a deeper hole, as I said.
But I do think we bear some responsibility, not all, but it takes two to tango. And that's not to blame the victims. That's just to say, I did go into a room with Harvey Weinstein. I sat at a table with him. He never made any sort of physical advance to me. I wasn't in the room alone with him. I had been sent there by an agent in the middle of the daytime. I didn't think there was anything wrong. I wouldn't have gone into that room at night. He did nothing inappropriate toward me. Now, had he, I would have picked up that glass and smashed him across the side of the face with it.
One thing about when she makes comments like this, and I do think that this is like typical of an actor and actress, that they are just me. Like they don't think about everything else and everyone else in the surrounding context, is that she's not thinking about the fact or acknowledging the fact that she got her big break. The role that she's had for the last 20 years, the role that's made her a gazillionaire, was on a female showrunner's show. That is a huge factor, to have not only a female showrunner, but all of those surrounding people in positions of power to be a lot of women. And also, she's right at the top too. So it's just different. And the comments, just everything about it was bad. As I said, Ellen Pompeo isn't in it very much anymore, but she is still in it. And I really do wonder if someday we'll get Meredith Grey, the golden years. And I'm sure it won't be too long until we start seeing the next generation of Dr. Greys with Meredith's kids, Zola, Bailey, and Ellis. And I wouldn't even be that surprised if they do a bit of a repeat of the ER ending. In the series finale of ER, which was the previous longest running medical drama that ran for 15 years, they had one of the fan favorite longtime characters who'd actually passed away, spoilers for ER. he had his kid return that had been in the show throughout it, and she had come back to the hospital as a new intern. And when the doctor, who was one of the interns in the very first episode, he actually comes out and says, "Are you coming, Dr. Green?" mirroring the first ever words uttered in the very first episode of ER.
Dr. Green. Dr. Green.
Dr. Green. You coming?
And I wouldn't be surprised if something similar happens with Grace. You probably can't hear her, but she's snoring, and this video has been such a deep dive, I cannot tell you how long I have spent on this video. Insane amount of time, but I love the show, so I wanted to do this video and make sure it covered everything it possibly could. Early Grey's truly was some of the last big appointment TV. Like Addison's arrival, the post-Super Bowl episode with the BOMB, the ferry crash, the shooting episode, McSteamy, the panties, 007, Denny's LVAD wire being cut. I remember watching those episodes live and then discussing with my friends and talking online to people about it. Later, doing videos on it. I used to do Grey's videos in Station 19 on my original channel, and I don't think anything exists like Grey's and appointment TV today. As I said at the beginning of this video, which must be 56 years ago now, today we have amazing TV, massive budgets, huge stars, highly produced episodes, and that content is fantastic. But there's just something else about Grey's, the early seasons of Grey's. It truly was a phenomenon, and it felt like everyone was watching. Even the stuff I was saying about the language, like everyone was saying seriously and McDreamy or McSteamy and all of that stuff. It's why I'm so interested to see the analytics of this video, because I do wonder if people who used to watch the show back then during like the Magic era, who probably don't watch it as much now, like would they still want to watch this video? And then I'm also really interested to hear from like the new generation of Grey's watchers, because that must be such a different experience to what I had. Some of those people weren't even alive when Grey started, and they probably wouldn't know like a lot of the really stupid little context things surrounding the shows in the early seasons, but then maybe they had some stuff spoiled. I'm just really interested to know. And as great as Grey's was, it makes it all the more crazy that all that chaos and drama was going on behind the scenes. And that makes it even more impressive that it's still on the airwaves 21 years later. So when will Grey's Anatomy end? As someone who has literally watched since day one on March 27th, 2005, I've learned to stop guessing. But I know for sure, whether I want to or not, I'll be there to watch when it ends. And who knows, maybe we'll get one last bit of Grey's magic and some of our favorites will return. But knowing Grey's, they totally could make that happen. But if they do, they'll probably bring back all of our favorites, give us exactly what we want, and then immediately kill them all off. Thank you so much if you made it to the end. Oh, you're fucking amazing if you made it to the end of this one. Leave MVP below so I can thank you, because you really deserve it. And leave me your favorite Grey's character or favorite Grey's moment. If you didn't watch Grey's, leave me an emoji. I won't take any more of your time, but if you enjoyed the content, consider subscribing, but no pressure. You made it to the end of this one. That's enough. And my Patreon, merch, my social media, Miss G's social media, and everything else is down below. As always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye, guys.
You get your reward after your work. You have to do your work first, though. Come on. Good girl. Are you ready? Okay. Is that lighting okay for you? Okay, good.